That's been a whole list. Okay.
Yeah, he coaches over at Santa Fe High.
Yeah, he loves coaching.
Yeah. I don't know if I was gonna talk to him. I don't know if Chris Edie's gonna continue over there or not.
He's been doing a lot of produced water work. That's been great.
Who's the next witness?
Calvin Boyle.
Okay. And then it's, because Eddie's the one that's remote, right?
No, Calvin's remote.
Oh, Calvin's remote. Okay.
It's coming. Is it something?
So let's get there.
Freya, are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Okay, very good. We are back on the record. It is 1 o'clock. It is snowing heavily outside and we have witnesses that need to get to the airport. So, Ms. Bradfute, with that little introduction, let's bring your third witness. I think that was Mr. Boyle.
Yes, and he is with us on
see it.
Teams.
Mr. Boyle, you're still under oath. Make sure you speak loudly so that the recording picks you up because we don't have a court reporter today. It'll be transcribed after the recording is over. Please proceed.
Good afternoon, Mr. Boyles. Can you please state by whom you are employed and in what capacity?
I work for Coterra as a facility engineer.
And are you familiar with the facilities plan for the Turnpike wells proposed by Magnum Hunter?
Yes.
Have you prepared written testimony in advance of today's hearing?
Yes.
Was that testimony marked as Exhibit C in the exhibit packet that was filed with the division?
Yes.
And having submitted this testimony, do you have any corrections or modifications or changes that need to be made to part of Exhibit C?
No.
Mr. Boyles, as you sit here today, do you adopt the testimony that you pre-filed under Exhibit C as your testimony?
Yes.
And as well, do you affirm the veracity of the exhibits and the slides that were attached in Exhibit C?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Boyles, could you explain what the facilities plan is for the Turnpike wells?
Yes. We will have two pads, one to the south and one to the north. On the south pad, we're going to have a satellite, which means we're going to put the separators there, and then we'll run bulk lines up to the CTB, which will be with the north pad. And that allows us to continually drill off those pads without having any additional surface disturbance. And then on the CTB, it'll be a tankless battery on the CTB.
Okay. And I'm going to share my screen, so hopefully you can see the exhibits that I'm showing really quickly. And I just want to run through 1 to 2 of your exhibits quickly. So, Mr. Boyles, does Exhibit C2 reflect the facilities design that you just described?
Yes, it does.
And what are the benefits, in your opinion, of Cimarex's facilities plan?
Okay, so like I said, the picture on the bottom, that's our satellite. That's where we put our satellite separators on pad. And with that, we're able to continually drill off that pad, adding more and more wells. And we'll only have on-pad flow lines, which tie into bulk lines after the first development. You'll have to put the bulk lines in during the first development. And then after that, we only have on pad. We only work on pad. So there'll be no further disturbance off pad. And then as far as the top picture, that is our tankless central tank battery. With that, we, in the past, the vast majority of operators or all operators have issues with thief hatches and end of lines, and we have completely designed that out of this design. So we now have 0 high-risk emissions devices. We also removed the high-pressure flare since Cimarex has a 0 routine high-pressure flaring policy. And then we install redundant VRUs. That way we can also drive our LP flaring to a minimum as well. And then on top of that, on the spill side, we do quite a few things to make our facilities less likely to have spills.
Okay. And Mr. Boyles, in your opinion, will this facilities design reduce emissions and venting and flaring from the turnpike wells?
Yes.
Mr. Boyles, what does this exhibit show?
So this is comparing what we were doing in the past, like I said a second ago, with thief hatches and end of lines on the right back in 2019, compared to our tankless on the left. And again, we were seeing emissions issues with our tank facilities as well as lower capture off of our tanks. And so when we moved to the tankless facility, we were able to drive our failure rate down to 0 off the CVS, and then as well drive our percent capture off of the tanks or surge vessels up to 97%, which in that lowers our low pressure flaring.
Okay. And in Exhibit C4, did you compare Cimarex's venting and flaring metrics with MRC's venting and flaring metrics in 2023?
Yes.
And can you just really quickly explain what these graphs show?
Yeah, so pretty quickly, this is all data that was submitted to the EPA, and we're just showing it here. So on the far left, you'll see the Permian flare intensity. So that is the amount of gas that you flared divided by the amount that you produced. And in that, we were significantly less than MRCs. On the top right, that's the GHG or greenhouse gas intensity. And again, that's on the emission side, and we're significantly lower than MRC. And then in the bottom right, that's specifically methane intensity, where it's your methane emitted divided by your total metric tons of gas produced. And again, we're significantly less.
And did you perform a similar analysis comparing Cimarex's and Avant's operations?
Yes, these are the same charts, just with Cimarex and Avant instead. And again, we're significantly less in all 3 categories.
And Mr. Boyles, in your opinion, will Cimarex's facilities plan for the turnpike wells reduce surface waste?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do believe that. Between flaring gas or emitting gas, we will be less.
Thank you. That's all of the questions that I have.
Thank you. Mr. Feldewart?
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Boyle. I see in paragraph 12 of your statement that you were going to various efforts you undertaken to allow Cimarex, as you say, to minimize flaring. Is Cimarex operating flares in New Mexico?
Some, yes, sir. We have a low pressure flare on every facility. It's a safety.
And are you flaring gas?
Yes, sir. Like I showed in on my last slide, even on our better tankless facilities where we catch about 97%. So we're flaring about 3% even off of those.
Okay, on those existing facilities, I think your paragraph 14 of your statement reflects that for your existing facilities, you are seeing an average of 8% to up to 19% failure rate. Is that right?
Yeah, there's a range there depending on the facility.
Okay.
And you're talking about, do you mind pulling that up? So I'm looking at what you're looking at.
Sure. Do you have your statement in front of you?
I can. I wasn't sure if I was supposed
Let
to
me
have
see
it.
if I can share.
So-
Hold on. No, that's all right. Let me see if I can share. So paragraph 14, right?
Yes, sir.
Cimarex tankless facilities is 0 compared to an average of 8%, which you say ranged from 0 to 19% on Cimarex's older tank facilities.
Yes, sir. That's correct. I just wanted to do a comparison between a tank facility and our new tankless facility. And
Okay.
again, on this development, we're going to have tankless. So
And
I
you're-
would expect these 0.
But your existing facilities seem to have up to 19%.
Yeah, they can.
Are you spending money to address those?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Are you aware that, are you meeting the gas capture requirements imposed by the recent rules enacted by the Oil Conservation Commission?
Yes, sir.
And you're aware that MRC is likewise meeting those requirements?
Yes.
Okay. In fact, isn't it true that MRC's gas capture requirement is up to 99% based on your studies?
I'm sure, I don't actually know that stat, but this specific, when I show 97%, I mean 97% off the tanks alone, not the entire gas. If you include the entire gas, we're well above 99%. We're like 99.8.
Okay. In terms of gas capture.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, I think you've also testified in paragraph 8 of your statement that in order to initiate your development, lay down development, that you're going to need some power surface equipment out there that would require new roads, 2 new well pads,
Yes,
right?
sir. Yes, sir.
And additional acreage disturbance for a tank battery,
Yes, sir.
and then additional surface disturbance for bulk lines.
Yes, sir.
And I think you offered a total of 24 acres of surface disturbance.
Yes, sir. I believe that's correct. You could scroll up and I could definitely affirm that.
I think that's correct. I agree with you. That's correct.
Okay.
And I know you're not here, but I guess, have you ever been to the Oil Conservation Division's building here in the hearing room?
Yes.
Been seeing the parking lot surrounding it?
Yes, sir.
So your 24 acres of surface disturbance would be bigger than the surface disturbance for this building and the parking.
Objection,
Right.
that it assumes facts, not in evidence about the area, the size, the acreage.
He's seen it.
Hold on. It's already been answered. Unfortunately, your witness is very quick to answer the questions, which is appreciated today, but yeah, it's a little late, so I'm not going to make a ruling on that objection. Please proceed, Mr. Feldewert.
And then you've heard the testimony that's presented up in this case up to this point?
Yes.
Okay, and you're aware that MRC will be able to develop its stand-up wells without any additional new surface disturbance,
Yes, sir.
and that they'll be able to utilize the existing tank battery for their Eagles wells.
Yes.
Okay. That's all the questions. Thank you.
Mr. Holliday.
I have no questions.
Very good. Mr. McClure.
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner. I do have a few questions for Mr. Boyle. Mr. Boyle, can you please describe for me how production from contract area 1 and contract area 2 would be determined in these facilities?
Do you mean when you say contract area 1 and contract area 2, what exactly are you specifying?
Essentially above and below the depth severance within the bone spring is how Cimarex has described it in its exhibits.
Okay, yeah, I believe that we're planning to drill different wells on above and below, and with that, we'll have a different separator per well. And with a different separator, we'll have an orifice meter and a Coriolis meter that will be allocated back to those wells.
And are you asking the division to impose stipulations as to the quality of meter, calibration dates, the requirement that those meters stay in place and that production is separated and metered prior to commingling it?
I'm not sure what we're asking division on that front.
Mr. Examiner, if I may, I think
Yes.
Mr. McClure is asking kind of for a legal position from Cimarex. And I believe Cimarex would be willing to agree to whatever measurement conditions Mr. McClure deemed fit.
Okay, Mr. McClure, did you hear the answer?
Yes, I did, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
Mr. Examiner, the other thing I would note is, once again, none of this is in their application or public notice that it would be even considered today.
Yeah, thank you,
Understood. Thank you. Mr. McClure?
I have no further questions for
Oh,
this
very
expert.
good.
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner. Thank you, Mr. Boyle.
Thank you.
Ms. Bradford, may this witness be excused?
Yes, Mr. Examiner.
Thank you. Let's call your final witness, and that would be, let's see, I see here, not sure how to say it.
Mr.
Beam?
Beam.
Thank you. Got it. Mr. Edward Beam, you're under oath, sir.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Could you please state by whom you were employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by Coterra as a senior reservoir engineer for Lee County.
And are you familiar with the petroleum engineering plan for the turnpike wells proposed by Magnum Hunter?
Yes,
Have you prepared written testimony in advance of today's hearing?
yes,
Was that testimony marked as Exhibit D in the exhibit packet that was filed with the division?
yes.
Having submitted this testimony, do you have any corrections or modifications or changes to the testimony that need to be submitted along with Exhibit D?
I have one on number 24.
Okay, and are you referring to paragraph 24 of your affidavit?
Yes,
Okay, let me turn there. And I'm going to scroll up just slightly.
yeah, it's right there. It's the top sentence on that page. For the 1 mile cost that we'd be carrying, that 3.375 million would be 5.76 million per well.
And what is the cause for that change?
Oh, the additional working interest we've acquired within section 32.
Okay, and did Magnum Hunter just recently acquire that additional working interest?
Yes, this is the same changes Bella covered earlier in our testimony.
Okay. With the exception of that change in that dollar figure in paragraph 24 of your affidavit, as you sit here today, do you adopt the testimony that you filed under Exhibit D as your testimony today?
Yes,
And as well, do you affirm the veracity of the exhibits and the slides that you attached to Exhibit D, making that dollar figure change?
yes,
Okay. Mr. Beam, you attached several different slides to your affidavit. We are not going to go through many of those slides, but I did want to have you explain a couple of them that folks testified about yesterday. I'm showing Magnum Hunter Exhibit D1, and I wanted you to explain what you were trying to show with this slide to the hearing examiners.
my point with these slides is that we're a prudent operator. We have excellent IP performance and we have excellent 1-year cum performance.
And this slide looks at performance looking at Lee County as a whole, right?
Yes,
And it applies to all 3 operators looking at total operations within the county.
yes.
Okay. And when you ran and created this study, where did you find that Coterra ranked among operators in Lee County?
But we're in the top 2 to 3 on both these metrics. If you just pull everybody in for the most active for the last 5 years, for I think it's 50 operators and 25 I've looked at.
Wow, great. I want to next move to Exhibit D3. And Mr. Beam, could you walk through this exhibit? It shows several different factors that we've talked about in the case.
Yeah, so this is due to the overlap, we've got 3 different competing companies. So everybody has their own capital AFEs that have been turned in. So what I've got here is by bench, what is the well cost for each company? So on the left would be Cimarex wells and our capital cost. Almost all the wells are 2 mile. So adjacent to that, I've got dollars per foot. So that's another way to compare well cost and capital efficiency. If I move over to Avance column, I know the second sand sounds like it might be changing from what's been proposed, but you can compare capital cost versus what we've proposed on a per well basis. And then the other thing you can see easily here all in one spot is that second sand has not been proposed at the same well density. If I were to move over, I've got Matadors in there. These are the AFEs we have. We did check last night. I don't have an updated AFE for this, so I'm showing the information we have that we've received. But I do not have a proposal for First Bone Spring, and I do not have a proposal for Upper Second Bone Spring. And so what I was able to compare was Lower Second, Third, and Wolf Camp. And again, just highlighting individual wells to be able to see the count and what companies have proposed to target with their development plans.
And not proposed, where you've noted not proposed in both Avance column and Matador's column, those are sections or wells signifying well spacing where no wells have yet been proposed by those operators, correct?
Yes.
What conclusions did you draw after putting together this information?
The key point of this would be that there are economic benches, which we then spend more time on in the exhibit that do not have a current plan. The other piece would be well density. 4 wells per section in the second sand, and really all these benches, if you're drilling it at 2 miles, there's not a big discrepancy in drilling density. It's more, is there a plan for the additional formations?
And at the bottom of this slide, you make some conclusions about the relative costs between the proposals for the wells, correct?
Yes. And yeah, and they are written there. It's just, if you were to sum up like for like, where well count's the same and capital is targeting the same bench at the same length, what's the delta between the proposed plans?
And Coterra's proposed plans offer significant savings, right?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Beam, you have analyzed the second bone sand interval, correct?
Yes.
And what is your opinion about the potential productivity of the second bone spring interval?
These plots are showing second.
But
I hear an objection. So hold on a second.
it's just,
What is the objection?
it's redundant because his opinion's already in his statement.
Okay.
I just want, there's slides with a lot of graphs. And so I do think it's helpful we're not going to go through each slide and each graph.
Sure.
But in particular, this one does matter.
Well, if you could focus on what makes this slide
Yeah.
matter
Yes.
and ask questions that don't
Okay.
require the witness to restate what he's already stated in his written testimony, it would be appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just
Thank you.
trying not to lead a little bit, but
Thank you.
yes, thank you. So Mr. Beam, in your study and in your analysis, have you concluded that the second bone spring interval is the most valuable target?
Objection leading.
I mean, we're going to be here all day if we object to leading questions. All the parties have been doing it all day long, and I haven't said anything
All
about
right.
it. But I've already explained what I'm looking to you for, Ms. Bradfeud. So if you could try not to lead the witness, and just let's get to the point.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Beam, why did you include this slide in your study?
To highlight that the upper and lower second sand are proven targets and they are outperforming the other choices in the area.
I want to look at the maps you included and diagrams you included in this exhibit. And I want to first start with the diagram here on the right side of the screen. Could you please note what you're observing with Avance acreage listed in this diagram?
What we're looking at in this diagram, it's from another public presentation. We were able to get a map for the area, and it's just highlighting Avant drilling units is how it's labeled in this map, and it's showing kind of the orientation of where the wells are planned. It's also giving kind of an overview of the infrastructure that was talked about yesterday. And so what's important here is there's a lot of east-west development 4 miles west of this acreage block. The other piece here is the acreage that we both own kind of goes outside of the sections that we're talking about today. So Avant has a significant position adjacent to this, just like we have a position to the south and Matador has one to the northeast. What I've got here is we talked about DSL today. And I do remember hearing earlier that it was all over the place out here. One thing I just wanted to highlight on this map specific to that is that section 32 has significant lizard restrictions on surface.
Okay. And
Whereas,
sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Beam. DSL, could you clarify what that is when you use that
dune
acronym?
sagebrush lizard,
Thank you.
and it would come with surface restrictions. And all I'm highlighting on the map is some different ways that acreage could be developed if Cimarex was elected operator.
And did Cimarex look at whether or not it could place surface facilities to develop Section 32 independently?
Yes.
And what were the results of those findings?
Our regulatory staff told us not to stay out of Section 32 was my feedback.
And was that because of the no surface disturbance limitation?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I want to look at Exhibit D-8A. This exhibit looks at the technical reserves that Cimarex has analyzed in the second Bone Spring sand, correct?
Yes.
Okay. What are the key findings from this slide that you want to point out to the hearing examiners?
That the upper and lower second Bone Spring are highly economic targets to pursue. What I've got down here is just for scale, because there is a wells per section difference. That if you were to look at state PV0, 12.5%, that's the value of on a 2 mile basis for developing these wells. That would be the important part on a dollar basis.
In your opinion, have all three operators proposed similar plans to develop the second Bone Spring?
They have not.
And what are the key differences in your mind?
The biggest difference that I see is the 1 miles from Avant. Working interest was covered earlier today. Those are 1 mile wells with a 1% interest. Some of the things that drive how important an acre is to us is how many we have. So if I have 1% of a 640, it's a really small percentage of the value that I've got down there. That would matter less to me professionally. If I've got a significant working interest over the development, then a lot of that total value that I'm showing down in the bottom is weighed. So that project would rank higher for development and be more important to the company developing it.
And do you think 1 mile development in Section 32 is going to be more challenging for an operator to pursue?
Yes.
And is that in part because of the significant service restrictions in that section?
Yes.
Do you believe that the second Bone Spring sand would be developed if Avant is awarded operatorship in Section 32?
I'm not sure. It would rank very low for choices. They have a significant acreage position with 2 miles. It's all competing for same infrastructure space. And if you were doing it on a money basis, it should rank very low in the development options they could go pursue.
Has Cimarex found that the second Bone Spring is one of the most productive intervals in Section 32?
Yes.
Okay. Is there some concern that these minerals would go without development, essentially being stranded?
Yes.
And very quickly, why did you decide to study hold on, real quick, sorry. Yeah. Why did you decide to continue this study and look at the upper second Bone Spring and the first Bone Spring sand?
This is just to highlight the same data, but for the other overlapping acreage unit. So
Okay.
first and second have not been proposed. Well, what does that mean in terms of scale across the acreage?
Okay. And this is when you're talking about first and second sand not being proposed, this would be the overlapping unit with Matador's proposed Bobby Pickard wells, correct?
Yes.
Mr. Beam, what conclusions did you draw after conducting your study?
Could you be more specific
Yeah.
for the question?
Yeah, after you've looked at the reservoir engineering analogs within the subject lands, the value of the technical reserves and the surface restrictions, what conclusions have you drawn?
Oh, in my opinion, the best way to develop this acreage is with 2-mile laterals, and the first, the upper second, the lower second, the third, the Wolf Camp are all worthy of being drilled.
Have you reviewed MRC's exhibits in its Bobby Pickard cases?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to turn really quickly. Those. I need to stop sharing and reshare this exhibit. Sorry. Doesn't want to switch pages for me. Okay. And Mr. Beam, did you review Exhibit B9 offered by MRC?
Yes.
Do you have any observations about the area of review that was selected by MRC for the study that was used later in the reservoir engineering exhibits?
Yes, in my opinion, and it's actually been pointed out, what part of our well performance is driven by having acreage in the south. General well performance improves as you head to the south. So I was surprised at how far south wells were being evaluated, because I would expect wells in 21 South to outperform 18 South with the same frac and the same orientation.
And did you review the degradation analysis that was performed by MRC's witnesses?
Yes.
Okay. And did you find issues or questions that you had about that analysis?
Yes, the main challenge here is that there aren't a lot of east-west wells drilled within the subject area. So if I look at this, we talked about frac overprints in some of the prior testimony. Frac is a massive overprint on well performance. We've also covered how wells improve in general as you head to the south. So the issue I have here is that there's 6 wells that have been drilled in the last 10 years that are the sample set for east-west versus north-south. And then additionally, we would have a different stress interpretation for the area.
Is it your opinion that it would have been more representative of the area to include more acreage to the west of the subject lands?
Yes.
Okay. And looking at the degradation study that was performed by MRC, they were looking at wells drilled from 2010 to present. Do you see problems with performing that sort of an analysis?
Yes, this is a very small sample set. There are 2 wells that are closer to 500 pounds per foot, 10 barrels per foot. This is at the very beginning of when people were figuring out how to best access the reservoirs. More common completions today are 4 to 5 times as big. Significantly more frac energy would give you a different result anyway.
And then Matador limited its analysis to 2010 to 2015. In your opinion, did frac designs significantly change from 2010 to 2013?
People were learning the entire time. The goal is to get the best at getting all the oil, so everybody's working on that every year. So yes, 2010, you might have tripled sand and fluid per foot. People are changing clusters. They moved from doing cross-link like a conventional frac to slick water, which I know Avant talked about yesterday. That was a big change. Yes, lots has changed.
Okay. And as in your position within the Reservoir Engineering Department at Coterra, do you review well proposals?
Yes,
Okay. And have you reviewed well proposals from Avant?
I have reviewed these proposals from Avant.
Okay. These proposals that you
Yes.
mean in Avant's cases?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm going to pull up Avant's exhibits. Sorry, my computer's lagging just for a second. I apologize. The screen does not want to share all of a sudden. So there's a computer lag there. I think we've looked at the Avant map a lot in this case. Do you recall that map that you've seen where their acreage is shaded in yellow?
Yes.
Okay. And it's included in numerous exhibits that Avant has proposed in the case, right?
Yes.
More specifically, I am looking at Exhibit A2, which contains one of the copies of those maps with the yellow shaded acreage. In your review of these maps, you've testified that you did notice that there was a lot of east-west development that Avant is showing on its maps, right?
Correct.
Are you familiar with Avant's Ghost and Gray Wind proposals?
Yes, those are two 1280 east-west or laydown proposals. They're 4 miles roughly away from the edge of their position. That's part of this case.
Okay, and approximately how far away are those well proposals from the Turnpike development area?
I would add another 7 to 6 miles without seeing the map.
Okay. And are you familiar with, and would you expect Avant's east-west Ghost and Gray Wind wells to underperform because they're not drilled north-south?
No,
Okay, what would you expect the performance from those wells to be?
I would expect them to be similar to north-south performance in the area.
Okay, and do you think performance from wells that are drilled about 4 or 5 miles to the west are going to perform significantly differently from the wells drilled in the Turnpike acreage?
No, I was surprised by how fast things are supposed to change.
Mr. Beam, I believe that's all the questions that I have for you.
Mr. Feldor.
Mr. Bream, you mentioned the challenges about developing in Section 32.
Yes.
Okay. You're aware that there is existing development over there, correct?
Yes.
Okay. In fact, isn't there an existing spacing unit that you're overlapping that is comprised of the west half and the northwest quarter of Section 32?
Objection. That existing spacing unit was built in the 1990s. I'm not sure that it assumes,
What's the objection?
The objection is relevance.
Spell the word.
It's a surface location.
Built in the 1990s.
I'm not sure I understand. If you're saying relevance, how does the age of the facility impair the relevance of the question?
Yeah, the dune sage brush lizard was listed as an endangered species this year.
Okay.
So those restrictions would not have existed in the 1990s.
Does your question, Mr. Frohlich, go to the dune sage lizard?
No,
So I'm not, so I,
That's okay. I can withdraw the objection.
thank you very much, Mr. Frohlich. Would you repeat the question?
sure. So you're aware that there's an existing spacing unit in the east half of the northwest quarter, right?
Yes,
Okay, which would have a surface location.
I have not looked at this specifically.
Okay. You said that you were told that it's challenging to develop in section 32, but did they inform you that there's no surface locations available in the west half of section 32?
I'm not a regulatory expert. We went out to survey several times, and the plan we put forth was our recommendation to proceed.
Okay, all right. This one, all right. Now, you also mentioned in your statement that you had no concerns with MRC's in-bench spacing and the number of wells per landing zone, right?
For the wells proposed, yeah, 4 wells per section. I think everybody's roughly in agreement there.
Agreed, okay. And your concern was that MRC, as you put it, had not proposed as initial wells in the upper Second Bone Spring sand and in the lower Second Bone Spring sand.
It would be the upper second and the first for differences between our proposals with MRC. And then the other piece I wasn't sure about is similar to Avant that I covered earlier with a 0% interest in the Wolf Camp. I wasn't sure how those would rank for Matador or MRC.
But I think you would agree with me that, and you were here for the prior testimony, I mean, MRC is going to develop the lower Bone Spring sand first as initial wells, right?
For lower, I'm sorry, could you be
Lower
more
Second Bone
specific?
Spring,
Yes,
lower
sir.
Second Bone
Yes,
Spring.
sir.
Thank you. You all have chosen to first develop the upper Second Bone Spring.
Correct.
Okay. You agree that there's nothing that would prevent either company from coming back subsequently and develop one or the other?
To my knowledge, we're the only one that's proposed coming back with that in our plan.
Understand. But MRC could come back later and drill the upper Second Bone Spring sand.
Theoretically, yeah.
Okay. Now your exhibit D1, I'm going to share if I may. I think you referenced this during your testimony. You said that you did this analysis to demonstrate that Cimarex is a prudent operator. Is that right?
Yes.
Are you suggesting that MRC is not a prudent operator?
No.
Okay, good. All right. When I go to exhibit D5, I see you chose a study area for the Second Bone Spring sand. Is that right?
Yes.
In the right-hand corner, is that your study area?
Yes.
Okay. And is this an area that you believe has a similar reservoir
Yes.
and a similar stress orientation?
Yes.
Can you explain to me why most of the operators in this acreage here that you chose to study drilled stand up rather than lay down?
There's a lot there. We spoke to some of this earlier. Sometimes if you happen to own, let's say I've got a stand-up 640 and that's my ownership. If somebody's drilled to both sides of that location, your choices are a 2-mile, or you could drill a 1/2 mile west-east. So that there is it's not in a vacuum. Some of this is what's been executed on both sides of you. And then also there's not a lot of stress data here. There isn't. I think everybody's covered that. When you're not sure, a lot of times people just look at what's closest and just do that.
Why would they look at what's closest and do that?
because they have analogs to point at.
Oh, okay. So you have some information that would indicate that stand up makes sense.
Or they have some well results to look at.
Okay. I know you mentioned some concerns about MRC study and Avant study about the degradation between stand up and lay down wells. And you mentioned that your concern was the frac improvements that would have occurred during different periods of time.
Yes.
Okay. Did you, for example, in this study area where you think the stress orientation is similar and the reservoir is similar, why didn't you do a study of the results of the stand-up wells versus the lay-down wells?
There's not a really good data set of east-west wells as a challenge that we're all addressing in this immediate area.
So we can only do the study with the data and the information we have now, correct? Isn't that your point?
Within this area, there's not a good modern frac analog for us to point at. One doesn't really exist in a really close area. If you go further out and expand your search and do a much larger area of review, then there's more data.
Good point. And that's what MRC did, right? They went south with their area of review to compare lay down versus stand up.
Yes.
Okay. And they did that, you were here for the testimony because they believe that the stress orientation is similar in their area of review?
Yes.
Okay. Would you agree with me that frac improvements, okay, would equally impact stand-up wells or lay-down wells?
The challenge is,
That's my question is, would you agree with me that frac improvements, the uplift in production is the same whether it's a stand-up well or a lay-down well when you just look at the frac improvements?
I'm sorry, could you ask one more time?
If you just look at the frac improvements that you referenced over time, okay, that the frac improvements would have the same impact on the well, whether it's stand up or lay down, when you just look at the frac improvements?
If stress isn't a factor, I would expect it to be very similar performance. Yes.
All right. When I looked at your exhibit D3, you did this analysis,
Yes.
and I think you alluded to the fact that it does not include MRC's updated AFE costs in the right-hand side of this analysis.
Correct.
When was the last time that Cimarex drilled a Bone Spring well in this particular area?
Yeah, roughly, it was the Mescalero.
Is that the one we talked about earlier?
Yes.
Cost overruns?
Yes, that's the same well.
Okay, that's the last well that Cimarex drilled in this area?
Yes.
So that was over 2 years ago?
Yes.
And that's where you submitted an AFE of 12.2 million?
That sounds correct.
And
Yes.
that the ultimate cost of the Bone Spring well was 15 million?
I would have to go double check that, but yes, that well did go over cost.
Okay, all right. When I look at your costs on the left-hand side that you put in your CapEx, I'd look at the middle column. That would be your AFE costs? roughly?
Yes.
Okay. They're quite different from the 12.2 that you used 2 years ago.
This is for multi-well development. That was a single well. We just put out our earnings call. We've got our Lee County average in there, which is a multi-well data set. It includes, I want to say 17 1-mile wells, and that's at about 1050. I'm confident in these costs.
Okay. When I looked in at these costs that you're confident in, you see how the upper second Bone Spring is 10.5 for the 4 wells that you intend to drill?
Yes.
Okay. And then we see the lower second Bone Spring, looks like one of the wells has 10.5 and the others are 9.5?
Yes.
That's not, is that a little odd?
We have some well sequencing. If I drill a well first, we aren't using an existing battery. We'd be building our tankless battery. So there's additional costs on the first tranche of wells.
Which would be the first tranche of wells here?
We are committing to drill the 4 upper Second Bone Spring sand wells first.
That's the 10.5.
Yes.
Okay. And the lower Second Bone Spring wells, why is it not matching the cost of the upper Second Bone Spring wells?
What we would like to do is get an additional second sand in there as an infill with our second batch, which is the Wolfcamp 700s. So similar to Avant's proposal, where they've got 2 packages. We also have 2 packages for how we've intended to drill this.
My question was, why are the costs of this lower Second Bone Spring sand less than the cost of the upper Second Bone Spring sand? Because you're going a little deeper, right?
Well, but the facility, some of the things Mr. Boyle covered, like the bulk lines, power lines, roads, that's all an initial investment that is now there.
And that's going to be borne by the upper Second Bone Spring owners
Yes,
and not borne by the lower Second Bone Spring owners.
that is how cost is allocated. Yes.
Have you got an agreement between the owners in the upper Second Bone Spring sand and the owners in the lower Second Bone
Objection.
Spring sand?
This has been asked earlier and the engineering expert isn't the right witness for that question.
Sustained.
Can you then explain to me why an upper Second Bone Spring sand is going to be 10.5? And I go down to the Wolfcamp and it's 10.2. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. Now the upper Second Bone Spring sand is shallower.
Yes.
And the Wolfcamp wells you're talking about here would be a deeper zone of the Wolfcamp, what they call a Wolfcamp D as in David.
They are Wolfcamp wells.
Are they the Wolfcamp D as in David?
I would defer to geos to agree on the naming convention for the bench, but we're targeting the lower Wolfcamp.
Lower Wolfcamp.
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
That's fine. That's fine.
Sorry.
So lower part of the Wolfcamp,
Yes,
much deeper than the upper Second Bone Spring.
correct.
Yet you show the cost of the much deeper Wolfcamp wells to be less than the upper Second Bone Spring?
These would be in our second batch, and our plan is to commingle into a single battery. So batteries are very expensive. Bulk lines, power lines, roads. There's a lot of infrastructure that happens. So if that's not there, then the infill wells wind up being cheaper in the future.
So is it fair to say then that your Wolfcamp wells down here at 10.2 do not include facility costs and the other costs you just mentioned?
They would only include an on-pad flow line and a separator, which would then go into the existing bulk line.
They would not include the other facility costs and the other costs that you mentioned.
Correct.
If I go to D4, this is your drilling plan. Okay, now, yeah, I think the bottom of this talks about the cost allocation that you just discussed, does it not?
Yes.
Okay. Where the owners in the upper Second Bone Spring would bear the cost of the facilities and the gathering, et cetera.
Yes.
Okay. Now when I look at the Second Bone Spring cost, the upper Second Bone Spring, you see that?
Yes.
Okay. I see 10.5 and then I see 9.5, 9.5, 9.5. Do you see that?
Yes.
When I go to D3 and I go to the upper Second Bone Spring, I see 10.5 all the way across the board.
Yes.
Is that a mistake?
If we could go back to exhibit D4, please. Yeah, so what I've got here is we sent out AFEs. February 2024 is the first column with capital costs. And the costs that we've got allocated per well is a function of timing due to surface costs. So what I'm showing now to the right is an updated current AFE estimate. And so the ship there is the order. So if we drill the upper second bone spring first and the battery has not been built yet, the first batch of wells would carry additional costs for the battery.
Okay, so that's the, who's going to bear the cost timing issue.
Yes, the first wells will need a battery to produce in and all the supporting surface infrastructure.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Um, that concludes my questions. Thank you.
Mr. Holliday?
Thank you. I do have a few questions. If we could go to Cimarex slide B8. Yes, Cimarex, exactly. Okay. Mr. Beam, am I saying that correctly?
Yes.
Beam, okay. So we asked your counterpart in geology some questions about this, and she deferred, what I understand she deferred to you. So I'll ask the same question. Are you concerned when we're looking at that upper second bone spring, are you concerned about fractures from the upper second bone spring penetrating that frac baffle that you've identified and causing depletion issues for the lower bone spring?
Not up in this area. And this might be, well, what's the biggest difference here versus we've shown a lot of our other wells that are spread out further to the south. Some of the biggest differences here would be the additional carbonate. There's a lot more separation and baffles between the individual landing zones.
Okay. Yeah, I have some questions about the carbonate. First though, can you estimate how many gallons of water you intend to use in your frac job here?
We would be 40 barrels per foot. So we do that times 42.
Okay. And same question, but for sand?
For sand, we'd be 2,000 pounds per foot. And we've done some research down in the south where we operate more heavily, where we've had success walking back frac, achieving similar EURs and rates. So that's what my geologist was referring to earlier.
Okay. And in this frac design, do you intend to pump acid?
That I would defer to completions for that. That can be, sometimes that might be on one stage at the beginning if you're having a hard time, or if you happen to be in a more carbonate rich zone. That could be very well specific. It could even be stage specific within the same well.
Got you. So the purpose of the acid is to break down rocks like a carbonate, correct?
If you're talking about matrix stimulation, that might be something different. This would be more like I've got poor connection right at the wellbore where the well's landed. So maybe you landed your well in like a carbonate stringer, and it's hard to get your frac off because you happen to be in like maybe it's a really small interval, or maybe your perfs aren't real good and you're just trying to get better connection to start the frac.
Okay.
But we would not be doing an acid frac if that's what you're referring to.
Do you have any concerns, should acid be used, about this acid dissolving those carbonates in that frac barrier?
I'm sorry, could you ask the question again?
Yeah. Assuming acid is used, or if you were to use acid in your frac design, or do you have any concerns that that acid might dissolve the carbonates within that frac barrier that you're relying upon?
The normal, for the volumes we normally pump, no. And if someone were doing an acid frac, maybe that would matter. I'm not sure. I don't have a lot of experience with that.
Okay. Do you know for sure that whether you will or will not use an acid frac?
We're not, yeah, we don't pump those. In Lee County, in the area, I have knowledge about.
Okay. So if we go back to the sand and water, approximately how far up and down do you expect that sand and water to travel?
From a prop standpoint, I would expect most of the fracture to stay well contained within the barrier. As far as I've seen water leak off before up structure, but as far as what's drainage and how well things are accessed, I would expect the fracs and the depletion to largely come from where the wells are landed.
Okay, so could you just give a footage estimate of how far you expect those to travel?
It can be a function of what's above you. So some of the most important things to me on a log like this would be some of the color shading Miss Fry did earlier. So if you're in a 200-foot sand and you've got a good stress change and a carbonate up above you and below you, you'd probably be more confined to that 200 feet. If that's 100 feet higher up, you might see 300 feet.
Okay, so that's the upper range, but what about the lower range downward, given the colors that we've identified on this plat?
Within the sands, I would expect you to grow a little bit down, not much, but and be more focused within the sands where we're landing the wells.
Okay. So do you know how far then, if you can't say how far you think the water and the sand would travel downward, do you have an approximate footage for how far from your proposed well that frac baffle is?
I can't answer that off of, I do not.
Don't. Okay. So how far, do you know how far above the upper second Bone Spring is the first Bone Spring target in Cimarex's plans?
I believe it's roughly 400 feet, 450.
Okay, so you've testified about, or let me make sure I've characterized your testimony correctly. Is it your testimony that Cimarex, based on your calculations, is the low cost operator amongst these competing plans?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Do you consider these AFE costs you've listed to be your final costs?
They are best estimate today. To my knowledge, we'll repropose under the order, and that might be updated for inflation or new costs or a different commodity, but that's our best look today.
So fair to say that those costs could increase?
They could cost change all the time.
Does Cimarex, to the best of your knowledge, ever have actual costs that do exceed their AFEs?
All operators can exceed their AFEs. Yes.
Sorry, including Cimarex.
Yes.
Has, to the best of your knowledge, Cimarex ever been involved in any Avant operated wells to date?
I'm not an expert on those, but the cut bow, we have a little bit of knowledge about the cut bow.
Okay. So do you have any knowledge about Avant's AFE to actual cost comparison?
No, I did not.
Don't. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the surface restrictions in section 32. Just before we go into further questions, can you detail for the record what specifically are these surface disturbance limitations that you're referring to?
As
For section 32.
for section 32, we had issues with placing a pad to minimize kickouts to be able to go target if we were to go drill to the east. Again, I'm not a regulatory expert. If you go from our other section, we're outside of DSL habitat, all of those issues go away and we're able to drill east-west without any of that added complexity.
So is it your testimony that section 33 does fall outside of the dune sagebrush lizard habitat polygon? That's a big word.
To the best of my knowledge, yes.
That's not, but you're not a regulatory expert.
No, I'm not.
So section 32 is state and state surface and minerals. Are you aware that Avant has surveyed and staked 2 pads and a central tank battery to support their 1 mile development in section 32?
I am not.
Okay. That's all my questions.
Thank you. Mr. McClure.
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner. I do have a fast line of questioning for Mr. Beam. Mr. Beam, you're familiar with the exhibits that Avant and Matador submitted in which they were preparing laydown to stand up wells, is that correct?
Yes.
Earlier, it seemed like you had referenced that maybe there was some frac technology improvements between 2010 and 2015. Do you believe that that comparison would be like to like, or is 2010 and 2015 too far apart in your opinion?
It's tough to go by year because things are changing so much. To be fair, there's not a good analog selection here. I'm not disputing that. It's just there's still a lot of frac overprint on that data, in my opinion.
Do you think that Avant study that went 2012 to 2015 may be reasonable then?
The big issue I have with that is the area included to the south. As far as that surprised me a little bit. If you drill a well in the south, I believe it's weighted 2 to 3 times to the south for well count. Just a rough estimate, but there's a lot of wells south of the east-west wells that were chosen. Those tend to be in better porosity, which means I've got more fluid to go capture within the same reservoir. So the exact same north-south well with the exact same frac by the exact same operator, I would expect it would to outperform in the southern end of that AOI anyway, in my opinion.
Yes, sir. And I guess I understand where we're going with that. But I guess what my question is, in your opinion, do we have the extra variable, not just the north-south aspect of it, in as towards the south it may produce more? Do you believe we have an additional variable in that the frac technology might have improved between 2012 and 2015?
Sure, there's lots of different ways that operators can place a pound per foot.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bean. I have no further questions, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
Ms. Bradford, redirect.
Yeah, I have just
Go
a
ahead.
few questions. Mr. Beam, prior to receiving Avance and MRC's exhibits, had their technical teams reached out and talked to anybody at Cimarex about wellbore orientation?
Not to my knowledge.
And neither of the companies had raised any issues with Cimarex about laydown development?
Not to my knowledge.
In this case, you testified during cross-examination with MRC's counsel that Matador doesn't own any interest in the Wolfcamp formation in Section 33. Is that correct?
Yes.
If Cimarex was in a similar situation where it did not own any working interest in a section, would it have an opinion about wellbore orientation that an operator was pursuing?
No. It would have no impact on what we were doing.
There were a number of questions about cost changes. Is it true, in your opinion, that all operators can exceed their AFE estimates that are provided?
Yes.
Does that happen frequently?
Well, not all the time, but everybody has a problem well every once in a while. You can have a one well come in high. It's the average of your development program that is kind of what you use.
Okay. And you were asked a question about the Mescalero well specifically by Mr. Feldwerk, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Are you familiar with the cost overages for that particular well?
Not in detail.
Okay, thank you. You did mention that there are some recent cost numbers that were presented in Cimarex's investor deck regarding its actual drilling costs compared to AFEs.
Well, it's the average for the county for this year. So if you wanted our most current snapshot, there's an average of Lee County in there. That's, I want to say it's last Thursday. So that's very similar to what was shown today. And then it includes 17 1-mile wells, which, as we saw in my dollars per foot comparison, are significantly higher. So it's, I've got 17, I want to say they're $1,900 per foot wells mixed into that average.
And were AFEs sent out to all the working interest owners that Cimarex is seeking to pool in these cases?
to the best of my knowledge, I would probably defer to Bella for working interest owner communications.
Okay. And that concludes my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any, no.
I just have one
On
quick
that-
question.
On what she asked?
Yes, on what you asked.
Go right ahead.
I just want to be clear for the record. Is it your testimony that Avant did not raise concerns with Cimarex about the east-west well orientation?
I have not, the testimony to that, I'm sorry, could you be more specific? Do you mean prior to the hearing or?
Yes, prior to the hearing.
To my knowledge, prior to the hearing, no.
That's my only question.
All right, thank you. Mr. McClure, anything else for this witness before we excuse him?
I do not, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
All right, thank you. Okay, does that conclude your case in chief, Ms. Bradfield?
Yes, it does.
Very good. Okay. All three parties have concluded their case in chief. So let's start with Avant and let's talk a little bit about rebuttal case. First of all, do you have a rebuttal case?
Yes, Mr. Examiner, I believe we submitted 4 slides.
Okay, I haven't seen them yet, so I just want to talk generally about your rebuttal case. What is if you were going to describe, almost like have an opening statement, but a very small opening statement about your rebuttal case, what would it be?
It would be, we submitted one landslide to discuss the issue raised by Ms. Bradfield on behalf of Marathon.
What issue?
An ownership discrepancy that she raised. So we introduced evidence to rebut that because Marathon had not yet contradicted Avant's ownership to date. And so we just wanted to put things in the record there. I mean, it's fair to say that we were surprised and it's new evidence based on the statements from Marathon.
Hold on one second. I want to understand it first, then I'll go to your objection. Sounds like you have an objection.
A clarification.
A clarification
I-
about what?
I also have entered an appearance on behalf of Marathon Permian LLC in the case. And so they are a party to the case separate and apart from Magnum Hunter and Coterra, unrelated operators.
Correct.
Thank you. Okay, back to your rebuttal case.
Right.
So you have a slide, a landman slide.
I'm sorry, there's 2. I said 1. There are actually 2.
Okay, so hold on a second. Let me write this down. So how many exhibits are you proposing to admit through rebuttal in total?
If you can give me just a second, I'll open them and answer that specifically. We have 4 total rebuttal exhibits.
4 total rebuttal exhibits. Okay, let's talk about each one. How are they labeled, first of all?
The land exhibits are labeled A16. That discusses Avant's ownership in section 32.
Hold on, I can't write that fast.
Okay.
Section 32, go
Section
ahead.
32. And then we have A17,
A17,
which was our response to Marathon Oil's title concerns.
MRC. title?
Marathon Oil's
Not
title
MRC.
concern.
Marathon. Got it.
You can write it shorthand MRO.
No, thanks.
Okay.
I'll get even more confused. Okay, so A17 is a response to Marathon's title dispute. How did you learn about that?
We learned about that when Ms. Bradfield entered an appearance on behalf of Marathon.
Okay, how did her entry of appearance clue you into a dispute on title?
I'd have to go back and look at the entry of appearance, but I believe it was stated blatantly in her
Ms. Bradfield,
appearance.
can you
Yes.
clarify?
Yes, I specifically stated Marathon's issue in the case because they were entering an appearance.
Which is what?
Which is that their title was incorrectly stated in Avant's title exhibits, their ownership percentage breakdown.
All right, I think, didn't you mention this already much earlier in the, like yesterday?
I did,
I
yes,
thought so.
yes.
Okay, so then, okay, all right, so we have that's A17. And you've seen these?
Yes,
Okay, and Mr. Fowler, you've seen these rebuttal exhibits?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we'll get to any objections in a minute. What about A18?
No, the next one would be B17.
B17, thank you. What is that?
B17 is something that's been pretty thoroughly covered by testimony. That's Avant's concerns about the stress rotation
Okay,
estimations made by Cimarex specifically. I know we talked a lot about those red lines. Right.
I understand.
I
I
trust
know what it is. Okay, so B17 is that exhibit and and what's next? B18?
B18. Yeah, B18 is introduced in rebuttal to, I believe it was Cimarex's D1 slide about comparing production rates in the basin. And this slide was introduced to demonstrate, because we were a little bit surprised by that because we didn't, that's not a like-to-like comparison in Avant's perspective. And so we introduced B18 to show that there's clear delineation between the northern and southern portions of Lee County.
And it rebuts Cimarex's which exhibit? Just put it in words, maybe Ms. Bradford will know what exhibit it is.
I believe it's D1.
D1. Ms. Bradford, what is D1? I think it has to do with your production engineer.
I can share if you'd like me to.
Thank you.
Yes, D1 is one of the slides that Mr. Bean just recently had up in the beginning part of his testimony, just showing operator performance throughout Lee County.
I remember that. Okay. So this rebuts that.
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. Okay. Ms. Bradford, do you object to any of these rebuttal exhibits?
I do not.
Mr. Felderwerd?
No.
Very good. Mr. Holliday, your 4 rebuttal exhibits are entered into evidence. Obviously, at the end of all this, we're going to instruct each of the parties to resubmit their exhibits. So we have one clean copy of all the exhibits properly labeled, and you can make corrections. Just 1 second. And you can make corrections that you have noted through your witnesses that this was an error and you were correcting it on the record. So I would highly encourage you to correct those, but I want a cover sheet that says these are the changes that we made from the original exhibit packet that we submitted. In other words, here are the rebuttal exhibits. Here are the corrections we made to the exhibits based on the witness's testimony. Okay? All right. Now, Mr. Felderwerd?
Yes, I'm going to raise a concern about what you just said.
Sure.
Okay. So having done this where you look to transcripts and you go to exhibits, or a lot of times we reference page numbers out of PDFs. Okay. My concern is if you take what's filed out of the record and replace it with what you would say a complete set. Okay. There is a likelihood that the pagination of the PDFs is going to be off. Okay.
Why is that?
Well, if you, for example, correct or add information to, let's say, A1, I go to A1 and I add information, it may change the format of that A1.
I understand your concern, and I don't mean to cut you off, but let's cut to the chase.
Yeah.
All the corrections that I've heard so far are very minor
Okay.
corrections. Nothing more than changing a sentence in an affidavit or such.
Okay.
So I've not heard anything that would change page numbers, unless you can tell me I'm wrong.
I think that's correct so far. Yes.
So far.
But I just wanted to voice that.
Oh, I
concern.
totally get that.
Because the other way to do it is we keep the existing package and then you just file the exhibits that you had to amend. So then for me and for others, I think when you come and look at the file 6 months later or a year later, it's a little easier to understand what happened. That's all I'm suggesting.
Okay, I understand your concern. I don't feel it's warranted in this case, but I will keep it in mind for future cases because I do agree with you that I wouldn't want to throw off the page numbers. However, with a cover letter that says these are the additional exhibits, that won't change the page numbers either because they'll come after. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Okay. So that's why I require a cover letter to be clear. Okay. Now, do you have, Miss Bradford, do you have a rebuttal case?
Yes, I do.
Please tell me what exhibits do you have?
Okay, I have 8 rebuttal exhibits.
8?
8.
8. Okay, how are they going to be labeled?
So they are labeled MHPI rebuttal exhibit 1 through 8.
Okay, so you're going to call them rebuttal exhibit 1 through 8, and you'll attach these at the end of your exhibit packet. And just to be clear, so that we don't throw off page numbers, which is Mr. Folderworth's concern, please put your rebuttal exhibit. Actually, I don't want you to label them A16, 17, B17, and 18. I want you to list them as Avant rebuttal 1 through 4, because I agree it would throw things off. So put them at the end as rebuttal exhibits. Go ahead, Ms. Bradford.
Okay.
What are they and why are they here?
So the first rebuttal exhibit is an engineering rebuttal exhibit. Coterra or Cimarex was not on notice that the area of review is going to be selected. And there have been a lot of questions about the areas of review selected for the degradation studies. And so it took a very similar study, copying MRC's degradation analysis and Avant's analysis, looking at a box to the west.
Okay, fine. What's the next one?
The next one is, there's been a lot of conversation about laydown development. Coterra and Cimarex were actually surprised that Avant was going to oppose laydown development given the number of laydown units they had proposed. And so they have prepared an exhibit showing and labeling all of the specific well names from Avant using the map that had been previously
So
proposed.
it's just a list of Avant's laydown wells.
Yeah,
in the area.
it's a map and then it's got the boxes with the well names.
Okay, as long as that's all it is.
Yeah, it is.
I can see how that could be helpful. Okay, number 3.
Number 3 is we did not expect Avant's landman to be missing so many recorded assignments from the interest numbers and her list of ownership in the exhibits. And so when our landman Bella Sykes reviewed that and she went into the county records and saw the missing assignments, she put together a list of those missing record title documents with the filing number in the county records, and then a list of strangers to title that she was also surprised to see listed.
Missing from Avant or MRC or both?
Missing just from Avant.
And is that from an Avant exhibit number?
It is rebuttal to Avant's landman's affidavit in paragraph
Oh,
21.
affidavit, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, very good. I should have asked, and exhibit number 2, the list of Avant laydown wells, is that a rebut to an exhibit?
That is a rebuttal to testimony, actually, that it was about the testimony about the wellbore orientation.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Number 4?
Number 4, Cimarex was surprised to hear the testimony or see the testimony in paragraph 19 of Avant's landman's affidavit stating that it was claiming title under the Zafiro JOA. And so it has put together the title, a list of the title documents in the county record filings that are the basis for its mineral interest title.
For which owner?
For this is when Avant claimed that it wasn't going to credit Cimarex with the full interest in Section 32 due to the fact that Cimarex had not produced a JOA.
And how is that relevant to the compulsory pooling application?
That is relevant to the pooling application because it goes to document Cimarex's title as shown in its own ownership list, and it rebuts what is shown in Avant's ownership
So
list.
you're saying Avant shows a smaller interest, and
Mhm.
you're saying Cimarex has a larger interest, and
Yeah.
here's why.
Yeah, and it specifically goes to paragraph 19, which we were surprised to see
19.
in
That's what
the
I-
landman's affidavit.
Okay, number 5?
Number 5 relates to that Zafiro JOA. It is copies of the JOA pages and that had been produced to Avant and the recordings, like a recording in the county records referencing that JOA.
The same interest we were talking about in number 4? So
Yes.
they're related.
They are
Okay,
related.
go ahead. Number 6?
Number 6 is a summary based on all of the working interest control exhibits that have been introduced in the case, showing everyone's maximum number of working control interest that they have talked about. Because this case involves overlapping units in part, giving everybody the benefit of the doubt, looking at the highest number of total working interest control and comparing that. All of the parties have asserted arguments on working interest control. This consolidates it so you could see it in an image.
Why wasn't this exhibit submitted with your exhibit packet originally?
We did not know what Avant owns in section 29 and what MRC owns in, what Avant owns in section 29 and what MRC owns in 28 before they filed their exhibits. So we were unable to determine what their working interest control was going to be.
Okay, so this dealt with the unknown interest in 28 and 29.
Yes, yes.
Okay, number 7?
Number 7 is, or was that 5? Did we just talk about 5?
Nope, we
No.
just dealt with 6. 5 was related to 4, which was 5 was a JOA related to number 4.
Okay. And number 7 is feedback from the BLM on whether or not a communitization agreement could be approved for Avant's Bone Spring for a non-standard spacing unit that omits an interval within the Bone Spring pool. This information documents Mrs. Sykes' research and did not exist until November the 1st.
Okay, and number 8.
Number 8 is a copy of the Exhibit A to Matador's JOA, and we can not file this one.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so we have 7 rebuttal exhibits. Mr. Holliday, any objections to these 7 rebuttal exhibits?
Yeah, we do, Mr.
Go
Mayor.
ahead, what are they?
Okay, so as you've made very clear repeatedly, rebuttal is a very narrow case. And it's based on 2 elements, surprise and foreseeability, right?
Yes, right.
So if we look at these exhibits, Avant's position broadly, I can go through each of them individually, is that there is no surprise and each of these arguments were foreseeable based on the interactions of the parties in the almost year that they've been trying to work this out prior to hearing.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so when we look at Exhibit 1, Matador Exhibit 1, this is a rebuttal about discussing about orientation. The orientation concerns of Avant, as opposed to Simrex's plan, were well documented. I don't think any party was unaware that the orientation was going to be a major issue in this case, and we feel like this, if it's to be included, should have been in the case in chief, not in rebuttal.
I thought that number 1 was the engineering area of review of degradation.
Yes, that is correct. It
How does
is.
that deal with? So how does that deal with what you just said, Mr. Holliday?
Okay.
Have you shared these rebuttal exhibits
Yeah.
with Mr. Holliday?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Okay, and have you seen these rebuttal exhibits, Mr. Holliday?
I have.
Okay, good. Do you have it in front of you?
I do. And they're discussing east-west, north-south orientation in this slide.
But Ms. Bradford said that the import of this exhibit is the area is the review of degradation.
Okay.
How does that,
If that's the import of this slide, then I'll drop my objection.
is it not, Ms. Bradford?
No, it is.
Did I mishear you?
It's essentially taking the studies that both parties did and just flipping them to, and running a similar analysis.
All right, we're going to deal with it one at a time, so I can hear your objections to number 1.
Oh, I just wanted to clarify.
Oh, sure.
It was the one where I had my hands and I said, it
Yes.
took our study,
Yeah.
flipped it and included acreage that appears to have a
I remember.
horizontal stress direction. That's what that one's all about.
I remember.
Okay.
But do you have an objection to
No.
number 1?
No.
Did you hear her list? Have you seen the rebuttal exhibits?
I have.
Good. Do you have an objection to any of her 7 rebuttal exhibits?
No, since the only one I had was on the last one, which you removed, so we're good.
All right. So we don't have any objections from MRC. So we're back to Avant now. All right. So number 1, we don't have an objection to, so that's admitted. Number 2, sir.
So if we go to, I believe it's Exhibit 4.
Hold on. I'm going one at a time though.
Okay.
Number 2, do you have an exhibit? An objection?
I have no objections to 2 or 3.
2 or 3? Okay. Now number 4.
Let me get there. I'm sorry. I do have an objection to 3. I have them mislabeled on my list.
Fine. So
Okay, so number
what the
3 is
objection?
the slide titled Title Errors and Omissions.
Yes.
If you look at Cimerex's call logs, you can see that on 9/6, 10/11, 10/14, 10/15, 10/17, and 10/21, there were either emails or phone calls amongst the parties to discuss title. So Cimerex chose to include lengthy title information in their case in chief. They didn't include this information. This is not new evidence. It's not based on any surprise. The parties were well aware of these issues before exhibits were due.
And to answer that, Ms.
Yeah.
Bradford?
So we did not see the breakdown of ownership interest until the exhibits were filed in this case. And that was definitely testified to today.
Okay. Mr. Holliday, specifically to what she said, that they did not see the breakdown of ownership interests until the hearing.
I'll just let my objection stand.
And
I
it
have no
was
reply.
until we received their exhibits. So when they filed their exhibits, we saw for the first
A
time.
week, 4 days ago or
Yeah.
whatever it was. Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Holliday, are you calling into question the veracity of that statement that Ms. Bradford made?
No, we're calling into question whether there was surprise or foreseeability and whether these documents, if they're going to list them out individually, should have been listed in their case in chief, which is Avant's position.
Okay, so I'm overruling the objection. So number 3 is admitted. Now, do you have an objection to number 4? And Ms. Bradford, do you want to say what number 4 is again?
Yeah, number 4 is the title document references for the interest subject to the Zafrino JOA, which was the JOA discussed in paragraph 19 of Avant's land ban.
I guess we don't have an objection.
Okay, perfect. So that's admitted.
Right.
Ms. Bradford. Number 5, which is related, I think it's copy of the JOA. Mr. Holliday?
Yes. So we do have an objection to this as well.
Okay.
Avant on multiple occasions requested copies of this JOA. I know I requested a copy from Ms. Bradford. We received no response. They're aware that this JOA and of Avant's concerns about this JOA and its applicability, and they chose not to put it in their case in chief.
Okay.
Same objection. This was both foreseen and it's not surprising anybody.
So Ms. Bradford, why did you not show a copy of this JOA in your original exhibits?
What's funny is we're presenting it as a rebuttal in specific response to what Mr. Holliday just raised. Cimerex did provide a copy of Exhibit A to this JOA to Avant. We were surprised that Avant was taking the position in its affidavit that it had not been provided with any information about this JOA.
I see. So Mr. Holliday, so in this exhibit, does it show that in fact you did provide it? Is there some sort of proof that shows that? Because is that not what
Yeah.
rebutting is the fact that?
I did not include the email where it was provided, but I did provide what had been given to Avant. I thought the witnesses would have a chance to testify to the rebuttal exhibits and say, yes, this is what I provided to Avant. So I wasn't sure about the
Mr.
procedure.
Holliday?
I can stipulate that the Exhibit A was provided.
Oh,
It's the actual JOA itself that this Exhibit A is attached to that no one's ever seen. And so that's why we object to introducing pieces of it when we requested the full document in advance of the hearing.
I mean,
Ms. Bradford?
we have had a lot of testimony, and Mr. Holliday allowed questions on the record about this Exhibit A. His land professional even testified that she had received this Exhibit A. And then,
What are you rebutting then?
so the rebutting is, it helps make the title issue a little bit more complete. It is not necessary, given that we have the Record County
Yeah.
title filing. So
So we're
if
not
this
admitting
one,
Number 5.
yeah, that's
Okay.
fine.
Very good. Number 6, do you have an objection to number 6?
I have no further objections.
Oh, very good. So number 6 and 7. So then we're going to renumber them, Ms. Bradford.
Okay.
It's going to be 1 through 6.
Okay.
Not 1 through 7, okay?
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. Now let me see something here. Hold on a second. Okay, now we have next MRI's rebuttal case. Do you have a rebuttal case? All right.
No, sir. No, because we admitted that the full report,
Yes.
you said you didn't
Yeah.
need me to admit the statement that we used for their geologist from the prior case.
Well, we didn't know, that was used for impeachment purposes.
Correct.
So I wasn't allowing that document to come as an exhibit. It's on the record that you used it, however you used it for impeachment purposes.
And I think identify the case number
You
where it's
did.
located. Okay,
You
good.
did, you
Then we're
certainly
fine.
did.
Yeah.
It's on the record. Okay, so MRI, no rebuttal case. We have Avant rebuttal, we have MHPI rebuttal. Okay. I am going to take a 10-minute break. I have some technical issues to speak about. So please let us reconvene. It says 2:32 now. Let's reconvene at 2:45. I understand witnesses want to get to flights. What time are the flights? 5 o'clock? Yes. The flights are 5 o'clock. So the Santa Fe Airport, I would say check in 45 minutes ahead. It takes approximately half an hour to get there, if that. So we're talking about an hour and 15 in front. All right, so we'll need to move along because 3:45 will be a cutoff then for you guys to get to the airport. Okay, got it. Thank you. Okay, it is 2:49 PM. We are going to hear the rebuttal case for Magnum Hunter Cotera first, since their witnesses need to leave. So we have 6 exhibits that have been entered into evidence by stipulation of the parties, although I think one of them was over the objection of Avant. I think that was exhibit number 3. So Ms. Bradford, who do we have on the witness stand?
Excuse me, we have Mr. Bean on
Okay.
the exhibit stand, and I apologize, my Teams just decided to flip out on me. So I'm pulling it back up. And it's coming back up right
Thanks.
away.
And while you're doing that, what is the purpose of Mr. Beam's additional testimony?
The purpose of Mr. Beam's additional testimony is Mr. Beams conducted a degradation study based on the exhibits submitted by MRC and Avant in their case in chief.
Okay.
And so he will be introducing those slides to help orient the hearing examiners when you go back and look through the record.
And Ms. Bradford, let's keep his direct examination to extremely limited and
Yes.
just stand for cross-examination since we have admitted the exhibits.
Yes, yes. Okay, Mr. Beam, can you see rebuttal exhibit 1? And is this the first page of it?
Yes.
Okay, really quickly, could you walk through your exhibit? The main purpose is just to point out the highlights of the most important points on the slides included in your exhibit, and we'll take it slide by slide, okay?
Yes.
Okay, can you please point out the key items that you are trying to show in this slide?
What I'm showing in this slide is a similarly broad AOI, except it's oriented more in line with Cimarex geologist interpretation of stress than our competing proposals.
Okay,
So
and the red rectangle is the AOI that had been identified by MRC in its exhibits, correct?
Correct. And then I've oriented a similar size rectangle east-west, bringing in more of the 45-degree points that we talked about at the county line.
Okay. And what are the most significant points from slide 2 of your study?
This focuses on the second sand. There's a lot of east-west wells over a broader area. The main difference here between this one and MRC's is I'm showing data through time. So the top plot is 2010 to present. It's 6-month cum per foot, 12-month cum per foot, and then 3-year cum per foot. And it's bucketed by east-west versus north-south for the same timeline that was given, 2010 to present. And then the bottom graph would be how I would separate maybe modern frac from old frac if I was just using a time period.
And what are your conclusions that you drew from looking at the data on this slide?
My conclusions on this slide is that east-west versus north-south over a broad area with our area of review, it looks like it's not going to be an issue.
Can you please look at the next slide of your study and just state the high points of this slide?
The left side is a map. It is phi H, which we talked about earlier in the hearing. So the more phi H you have, the more in place there is to go get. So this is doing a very small review of east-west third sand wells versus north-south wells of a very similar frac vintage. So you could look at the green versus the blue. The best comparison in here to me is the dark blue well, because that's the same operator. That's Franklin Mountain. Similar time period. The green wells aren't materially different than the blue, in my opinion.
And I'm moving to the next slide. What are you showing on this slide?
Just the magnitude of frac importance. Those are 2 new wells. You can't book them with an EUR yet, in my opinion, but the Gold State and the Sky Dweller, when we talk about frac, how big of a knob is it? Those wells have cumed as much as the old wells did over a 10-year period, but they've done it in less than a year. So frac advances over the periods that have been being reviewed are very, very large.
Okay. And so frac design really can create a difference in well performance, especially when you're looking back at degradation, right?
Yes, and this is over a 2-mile wide area. So we showed lots of multi-township areas earlier. So this is over 2 miles, about as similar as you could get, with frac as the main variable, in my opinion.
I want to move to the next slide of your exhibit. Could you please tell us what the high points are of this slide?
This is just calling out the differences. And even if you constrain it to 2010 versus 2015, to Mr. McClure's question earlier, how different are the wells? So the two wells we have, the Magpie Tin Cup, are half the energy of the comparison wells that they're being compared against.
And I want to go to the last slide of your study. Could you please explain the key issues in this slide?
Not a lot of modern wells close. There is the Crazy Wolf well that's called out in pink, and you can just see how that's performing versus north-south in the same area relative to the type curve that we showed our values for earlier.
Okay, thank you. And this exhibit is already admitted, so that concludes my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Feldward.
Sure. Let me share. All right, so looking at your, how are you describing this? This is your rebuttal slide C1?
Rebuttal exhibit 1.
Rebuttal exhibit 1. Okay, looking at your rebuttal exhibit 1. So the MRC study area is boxed in red. Mr. Beam?
Yes.
Okay. And when you look at that area, that includes an area where experienced operators looking at the data available to them and including well results, who chose to drill almost all of them stand up, right? Over 90%?
Yes, within that AOI, it's predominantly north-south.
Okay. And what you've done is kind of turned that and you went to an area in the west where we see that operators are starting to drill a mixture of lay down and stand up wells.
Yes.
So you're taking an area where operators have drilled predominantly stand up based on the information they're having had and comparing it to an area where operators drilled differently based on information that they had.
Yes, it's oriented to the stress. So if you were to think back to the 45-degree roughly line that was on the county line from the exhibits, that would be roughly where that deep Elm rig location is drilling east-west. So it's just bringing in the area where stress rotates, and it's more similar to what our geologists testified to today.
And so is it your opinion that this area in green has a similar stress regime where operators can drill both lay down and stand up?
It's my opinion that the green box would include the area where stress is rotating, as well as where we believe it is more similar to the acreage, versus the red box, which aligns more 21 South. I think every company today agreed they would drill that north-south. That's down at the very southern edge. I would not lump those wells into the north.
So if I look at the insert to the right, which we have the Zobac study, we see the cluster of data points that indicate what, about a 45-degree stress orientation?
Approximately.
Okay. And you're suggesting that that 45-degree stress orientation extends now all the way east to the star?
Objection. We've already had a lot of testimony on stress orientation. This was really limited to rebuttal on the new study.
Mr. Feldward?
I'm asking his opinion about whether that stress orientation, whether he believes that stress orientation dictated by the Robach report extends all the way to the area of the star.
And Ms. Bradford, are you saying that this witness has already been asked this question?
I know the star is the subject area. Those are the subject lands. So I know we have had lots of testimony over the last 2 days about stress orientation around the star.
But this rebuttal exhibit is talking about stress
Mhm.
and the subject lands. And if this witness has not been asked this question before, I'm going to allow it.
I think allow it. That's
Okay.
fine. Yeah.
Mr. Felderberg, would you ask the question
Sure.
again?
So, Mr. Beam, since you chose this as your study area, are you suggesting that the 45-degree data point that is shown in the Zobac report extends from west to east across your study area to the star?
It would not be the same across again, I'm a reservoir engineer. So we've testified today that it rotates across the area. Up in 18 South, what we showed today was we showed a point that we had from our private array in 18 South 35 East, which would be the eastern border of where I've got the green box. If you were to move over to where the deep elm is, that's roughly where the 45-degree line is. So Ms. Fry testified earlier today of a 43-degree over at 18 South, 35 East from our seismic array data. And then it's roughly 45 by the deep elm. So across the north of that, I would say it's roughly consistent. And then it would rotate to that east-west, similar to Ms. Fry's testimony earlier. So this would capture a blend of stress orientation rather than just north-south.
A blend of stress orientation. So you're not saying that your study area includes from the east to the west, the orientation that is shown in the cluster data there for the Zobac report?
Oh, no, I can't make that claim.
Okay, all right. Okay. When I go to, maybe this is a little more helpful. When I go to the next slide down, this is a little easier to read depiction of your study area. In the upper left-hand corner, your second page of this rebuttal slide.
Yes.
This is the one where it has the bar graphs, green and blue, and to the left of that is the area that you analyzed.
Yes, these would be all the wells within that green box. So we looked at first, second, third. I'm showing second because that was what we showed.
Okay. And so again, you're taking an area where operators to the west have drilled almost exclusively stand up, and then comparing that to an area where operators have drilled a mixture of stand up and lay down.
Yes.
When I go to your next slide, page of this exhibit, this looks like this is an area that was this is part of MRC study.
This was a part of a Vance focused on the third sand.
Okay. This was also included in MRC's study area, right?
In the broader area, yes.
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 Where our geologist said he believes the stress regime is very similar.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And then if I go then to I think the last page of this rebuttal exhibit, number 1, this Crazy Wolf well that you pulled out here in red.
Yes.
If I look at exhibit C1, where is that located?
It would be, could you go back to my exhibit real quick?
Yes, I will try.
Yes. So that is 19 South, 32 East. Sections 3 and 4. That is just outside of this AOI.
So it's over here.
No, move your cursor up. It'd be sections 3 and 4. So you want to be in the northeast corner of Township 19 South, 32 East. Down from there?
Thank you. Right here.
Yeah, approximately.
Okay. Then much closer to where we see the Zobac data points showing a 45-degree stress orientation.
Yes.
And you're comparing that to the turnpike acreage. Which is closer to the data point that Zobac shows having a 75-degree orientation, right? 13 miles.
I'm sorry?
Closer to the Zobac data point showing us the 70-degree orientation.
It's,
So if I go back to C1 and I go to the star, you see the upper right-hand data point on the Zobac report?
yes.
That's a 70-degree or 75-degree orientation.
I'm not a geologist. I believe that's correct from what was talked about earlier.
And this is the area where your geologist had likewise testified a year ago that the orientation.
Objection to the form of question. Yeah.
Mr. Feldwood, I sustain the objection. So can you move on from this question, please? We've had enough about this.
Okay, that's all the questions I have.
Thank you. Mr. Holliday.
I have no question.
Thank you. Mr. McClure.
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner. I do have a quick question for Mr.
Please.
Beam. Mr. Beam, on your exhibit, well, it's labeled Rebuttal Avant C1 Exhibit Third Sand. That's page 7 of 37.
Yes, sir.
Do you believe it'd be more, I know earlier we were talking about a tendency to increase production as you go south. Would it be accurate to say that rather than as you go south, as you have an increased porosity times height? Would that be a better description?
Yes, as you move into that channel, production's going to increase. That's an overprint on all the data in this area.
Okay, and that is essentially the driving factor that we're looking at, correct? So it'd be more accurate to say that like in the middle of section 22 is going to be better than in the middle of section well, to the east of there. Is that correct?
Did you say that again, sir?
Do you
For
see
section
that?
22 and 19 South 34 East?
Yes, sir. That's absolutely correct.
Yes, as you move south into that bigger, more continuous sand, I would expect the wells to be generally better.
But towards the east of there, you would expect it to be worse. Is that correct?
It would be, yes, it would be a little bit worse. Yeah.
Yeah, as you
Um,
start getting towards section, I guess 19 of range 35 east.
The only other thing that's going on here is also oil cut improving as you move with a structure to the east side in the third sand. So you could have a total fluid change that also has an overprint where you have a fantastic oil cut. But yes,
Okay,
in
so-
general, the sweet spot would be right through the middle of that channel, in my opinion.
But potentially as you get further away from the basin, you would have a higher oil cut. So as you go towards the east, is that correct?
Further away from. Yes, as you're moving up structure towards the edge of the basin, there's opportunity for pinch outs and other things to drive production.
Is that what you're referring to when you reference a higher oil cut to the east?
Yes.
Okay. On this same, on this table, on the same exhibit, you're referencing proppant per foot, fluid per foot, and lateral length. Do you think proppant per foot and fluid per foot is a relatively accurate description of the quality of frac?
It's the best publicly available description I have. And I would say roughly, 700 versus 500 might be pretty similar, but even then you can see differences in fluid. This is the best data I had.
Approximately, if you improvements in chemicals that's used in the fluids, would you have a date that you would think that might start making a difference?
For
And as
split-
more friction reducer, stuff like that.
For FR, I would be
Uh-huh.
leaning more towards, and it's going to vary by operator as well, because different people were moving at different speeds. I would go more towards 2015, towards the tail end of this window versus the early end. Down at 480 or 300 pounds, the smaller fracs with 8 to 9 barrels per foot. For all I know, those could be Packers Plus completions. You could have sliding sleeves. It could just be cross-link. I did not. I don't have that available to me, or what their cluster density is.
And would that be a concern on fracs that were completed around 2010 type era?
It's way more likely early in time. As you get closer to 2010, I would expect just an absence of slick water in general, and it's a more conventional mindset where people are. You might have 125 foot between clusters, 150 versus maybe 24 to 12, even on the low end, would be more common today. So it's a big change.
But as far as the implementation, or as far as starting to go more towards slick water and friction reducers, would you attribute that to 2015 and later?
I would be able to say by about 2018, 2019, everybody's there, and that transition period is over. I
But
don't
as
know if
far-
that helps. I'm sorry.
As far as the start of that transition, do you agree that 2015 is a fair enough beginning of that era for the crossover?
Yes, roughly. Yes.
If I can move you back up 2 pages to your page 5 of 37. Have you provided us with a list of the wells that you included in this study here?
Oh, I did not. I'm happy to attach one.
Okay, thank you, sir. Yeah, we'll make that that request as a part of our request here in a bit. Thank you, Mr. Beam. Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. McClure. May this witness be excused?
Yes,
All right,
Mr.
thank
Hearing
you.
Examiner.
Do you have another witness?
I do. I have
Oh.
one more, our land professional, Bella Sykes.
Sykes, I remind you, you're under oath. Ms. Bradfield?
Okay, thank you, Ms. Sykes. I want to turn to rebuttal exhibit 2. And I just want you to orient the hearing examiners as to what this exhibit is showing very quickly.
This comes from Avant's Land Exhibits A9, and this is kind of highlighting all of those laydown units that they had kind of outlined in their exhibit. This also has some call-out boxes where we have received laydown unit proposals. So that would be Avant Shinnery Oak, the Ghost proposals, and Gray Wind. Those have been talked about a lot. And this also shows the distance from those. Some other things we want to point out are Avant's 1 mile developments that they have within this little snippet. And then there's another one that's not shown, I believe a township or 2 south of this.
Okay, great. I'm going to move into the next land exhibit. This land exhibit, can you explain what this exhibit shows? It's rebuttal exhibit 3.
Yes. So after receiving Avant's exhibits, this is where I went through their exhibits and kind of pointed out those errors of people that I saw and started kind of noting where those parties had assigned out earlier in title. I believe most of these were somewhere around 1990s, early 2000s, and then also just pointed out the strangers to title. Strangers to title, we mean we've never seen them show up in our title chain. And then for Avant themselves, there have been interests that they have picked up and acquired that we do not see in title. And so just a little summary here of those interests and kind of where Avant probably went wrong.
Okay. And in your opinion, does this help explain the differences in the interest percentages that have been presented in Avant's exhibits versus what you have shown in Magnum Hunter's exhibits?
Yes.
And I'm going to turn next to rebuttal exhibit number 4. I believe. And can you explain what this document is showing?
I had spoken about this previously. It's just how we're not saying our interests are coming from a JOA. This is the assignment chain showing that Matador Petroleum Corporation, the operator of that of the original operator of that OA, and who had interests in the Exhibit A, and basically the mergers that happened in the early 2000s of how Magnum Hunter ended up with Tom Brown's interests, which were Matador's interests.
Okay. And this is a description of where Magnum Hunter's title is located in what is otherwise referred to as a contractual interest under a JOA in Avant's land exhibits, right?
Yes.
I next want to turn to the next rebuttal exhibit entitled Working Interest Control.
Would you use the numbers, please?
Yes, I believe this is rebuttal exhibit number 4. I need to renumber them, Mr. Hearing Examiner, so I apologize.
I see.
Yes. But the title of the exhibit, I've entitled it Working Interest Control. Ms. Sykes, can you please explain what this exhibit shows?
So once we understood from both parties filing their exhibits and seeing what they claim to own, we put that all out. So in green, sections 29 and 32, this is assuming that Avant's title is correct, according to their exhibits, they own 405 Bone Spring net acres and 367. And then Matador's Bobby Picard, according to both MRC and Magnum Hunters, because we don't have any title errors between the two. They have 491 Bone Spring net acres and 402 Wolf Camp net acres. And then looking at section 33 and 32, which is Magnum Hunters Turnpike development, we show 777 Bone Spring net acres and 850 Wolf Camp net acres.
Thank you. And the last rebuttal exhibit is entitled BLM CA Feedback. It's rebuttal exhibit number 7, I believe.
It was 7, but you're taking out number 5, so it's actually number 6 now.
Thank you. Exhibit number 6. Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner. Ms. Sykes, can you please explain what this exhibit is?
Yes, this is just Ed Fernandez's comments. I had emailed him to kind of figure out about a Bone Spring communitization agreement, and if the BLM would approve one if an interval of the Bone Spring was cut out. And so I believe I talked about this earlier, but this is just that correspondence.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ms. Sykes. That concludes my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Feldwart.
No questions?
Thank you, sir. Mr. Holliday,
I do have a couple.
please.
Okay, so if we can go back to Exhibit 2 again.
You mean rebuttal to?
Rebuttal 2, yes, I'm sorry. So this map here, yeah. So we've heard a lot of testimony, or do you think it's accurate that the testimony today is that stress orientation changes as we move from the east to the west?
Objection. This is our land witness.
She testified about the orientation of wells depicted on this very plat.
She can testify to the extent of her knowledge.
I do not know about stress direction. This is just me highlighting laydown units that Avant has put forward.
Okay, well, that's a good question. That's my next question. I think we've also had testimony that these, what you're describing as laydown units, are not all, in fact, laydown units have been proposed. These are actually tracts in which Avant owns an interest. Is that correct?
That I'm not exactly sure about. If you actually zoom into the original image, the sections within these are not specifically called out. And so that would lead one to believe that these are laydown units.
Okay, so you don't know that these are laydown units. You believe, based on your review of the plat, that these could be laydown units?
Based on my review of the plat and the proposals that we have received on this map, yes.
Okay. And I don't have any concern with the proposals you have received. It's just sort of this cluster to the far west here. I just want to be clear, you don't know whether those are proposed units or not.
I do not know for sure. If you look at it face value, one would be able to assume that they are.
Okay, thank you. If we could go to the rebuttal exhibit 3. And just the first page, we'll start with the Kaiser Francis. So the next page, yeah. Okay, your testimony, if I characterize it correctly, is that Avant had errors in their title. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So did you personally examine these instruments?
I did look at a few, but not in depth like my title attorneys would have. I did have communications with Kaiser Francis where they did reach out to me. They said Avant had proposed wells. Why haven't y'all proposed to us? And so I did send that information to my title attorney, and he was able to find the assignment that showed Kaiser Francis no longer owned in Section 32. And I sent that information back to Kaiser Francis. And from my communication with them, they kind of understood that this clarified title and there were no further questions about them owning in Section 32.
Okay. So this acronym ARTI, what does that mean?
All right, title and interest.
Okay. So are you aware that this instrument is in fact not an all right title and interest? It's a depth severed conveyance of interest?
Correct.
Okay. So it's possible Kaiser Francis could have an interest in other depths than were conveyed by this instrument.
No, because the interest that Kaiser Francis received was also depth severed.
Okay. But you don't know about the chain of title backwards, right?
That one I did review, yes.
You did personally review this, the
Yeah.
entire chain of title?
From the one from whoever assigned to Kaiser Francis, I did review that.
So you looked at the vesting deed, but not any deeds upchain from that?
Say that again.
So is your testimony that you looked at the vesting deed for Kaiser Francis?
I glanced at it, yes.
Glanced.
My title attorney actually highlighted previously in title where that interest was depth severed. And if you move it forward, it was incorrectly added throughout title.
But you personally didn't review the chain of title behind that vesting instrument. Is that correct?
No, but people under my purview did.
Okay. So we can move to the next one. Same question. Are you aware that this is actually not all right title and interest? It's a depth severed conveyance?
Most of these are depth severed conveyances. If the original title or the original assignment that kicked off most of these assignments is from Hilliard to Union, and that was depth severed. That was from the surface to the stratigraphic equivalent of 9,548 feet as seen in the McLevain well.
So it sounds like you have a good handle on the depths,
I know the source document.
right? Why not include those depth severances in this document versus calling them all right title and interest conveyances?
It was all right title and interest as to what the party owned.
Okay. I'm just going to note similar concerns. We won't go through all these. I'm going to note similar concerns about Trainer Partners, Hog Partnership, Mexico Energy, Don Chappelle. I believe that's it. Okay. If we can move, my last questions are about rebuttal 4. So my understanding is you're relying on these documents to act as some sort of constructive notice to parties because the JOA was referenced. Is that correct?
Will you rephrase that question? Sorry.
What's the purpose of these documents?
So that is showing that Magnum Hunter received a majority interest in New Mexico from Matador, who conveyed to Tom Brown, who conveyed to Magnum Hunter.
Okay, so this is offered to prove chain of title and not any sort of constructive notice of the presence of a JOA or other unrecorded agreement?
Yeah, I don't think this is proven. I guess I don't understand the question. This is showing the record title chain of Matador to Tom Brown to Magnum Hunter.
Okay.
From, if you like, the dates with the OCD of the Zafira well do match up with these mergers in title.
It's still not clear to me what the purpose of these documents are, but
So this is showing that Magnum Hunter is not stating that our interests are contractual interests that we received under an OA. This is showing that through record title documents in the county records, Magnum Hunter received their interest, like leasehold interest. So this is showing when this JOA was created in 1998, that Exhibit A outlined the interest in that tract, right? The east half.
So what bearing does the JOA have to your title? I thought your testimony was that your title is not derived from the JOA.
No title is really derived from a JOA. It's a snapshot in time of what title is at that.
Of what the parties thought the title was.
Correct.
Okay.
But I would also reference back to my previous exhibit that shows a majority of the owners who formerly owned in the east half of section 32 assigned to Meatburn, who was the only other party of that JOA.
That's all my questions.
Thank you.
Any redirect?
No.
Thank you. May this witness be excused?
Did Mr. McClure have a question?
Oh, Mr. McClure, forgot about you. Sorry.
Well, to be fair, I was just leaning forward to say I don't have any questions.
Oh, thank you.
Good. No, this witness may be excused.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Have a safe trip back. Okay, does that conclude your rebuttal case, Ms. Bradfield?
Yes, it does.
It does. Okay, Mr. Holliday, your rebuttal case, please.
Yes, I'd like to call Miss Bellagera real quick.
Okay, and is she with us virtually?
I believe she is on Teams. I say Bella, I meant Sophia.
That is what you said.
Sorry.
So who did you mean?
There's been a lot of names. I intended to
Guerra?
call Sophia Guerra.
That's what I thought. Ms. Guerra?
Yes, can you see and hear me?
I can't
Well-
see you, but I can hear you. Maybe Marie can pin your picture somewhere. Can you stop sharing your screen? Thank you. Perfect. There you are. Okay. I remind you, Ms. Guerra, that you are under oath. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Holliday?
Okay, if we could go back to rebuttal exhibit number 2, I believe that's the plat depicting various Avant ownership interests.
Okay, whose rebuttal exhibit?
I'm sorry. Cimarex rebuttal exhibit number 2.
I thought Cimarex's rebuttal exhibit 2 was a list of Avant's laydown wells in the area.
That's what we're contesting, that it's not actually a list of laydown wells. It's a
I
plat.
thought that's what it was titled, is what I
Oh,
meant.
okay, sorry.
Sure.
Okay. Ms. Guerra, real quick. We've heard some testimony that these green outlines represent proposed spacing units by Avant. Is that correct?
Yes, we have heard that testimony, yes.
Okay. Do all of these green boxes actually correspond to planned spacing units by Avant?
Not all of the green boxes relate to a proposed spacing unit, no. The yellow on this map, as I think I testified and perhaps a few of my colleagues, is simply just acreage that we have an interest in and could be a proposed development plan or is just simply showing where our acreage lies in this relative area.
Okay, so these green boxes do not align to Avant's official development program.
No, not all of them, no.
If we can go to exhibit number 3, that's the list of title documents. Yeah. Did you have any concerns about this slide, Ms. Guerra?
We did, yes. Upon receiving this list in Cimarex's rebuttal exhibits, I personally went through and read each document. We do agree that some of them are maybe misinterpreted, and we can get to that when we get to my rebuttal slide regarding Marathon's interest. However, several of these, as you crossed Ms. Sykes, are depth severed, and we do credit interest to some of these parties still as shown in our summary of interests in my original testimony.
Okay, so fair to say Avant, like Cimarex, had title run. That title was then looked at by title attorneys, and that's what you're basing your decision on.
Correct. We, I think in one of my exhibits, there's a timeline of events. We employed a broker back in 2022 to start running this title. We've looked at, they've looked at, as well as we have thousands of documents through the record title, through county records, BLM files, you name it. And we believe that some of these parties do still own in sections 32 and 29.
Okay. So fair to say Avant has done a significant amount of title work in this area?
Correct. Yes. On top of the broker work, we have a title attorney who's drafted ownership and a title opinion for these lands.
So we go real quick to the next rebuttal, Magnum Hunter rebuttal exhibit number 4. Is it your understanding that Magnum Hunter is relying upon or has communicated to Avant that it is relying upon this 1998 JOA to boost its working interest in section 32?
Yes, I think potentially maybe there was a break in communication between Cimarex and ourselves. We were under the understanding that Cimarex was being credited additional acreage through this JOA. Again, as we've testified several times, we were never given a full copy of the JOA. We were only given the Exhibit A and the signature pages. So it's just not a document that we can fully review and credit in this case. Additionally, I do just want to point out that we were only noticed of this JOA about a couple weeks ago. And so we've had a very limited amount of time to apply this JOA appropriately and look at it in its entirety.
So in your opinion, if the JOA does not increase ownership, what is its relevance to section 32?
Could you repeat that? Sorry.
Sure. So if this JOA does not boost the working interest, or excuse me, I say boost, does not increase the working interest for Cimarex in section 32, how is it relevant to the title discussion?
We think it could be relevant in the fact that if it is an appropriate JOA, it should have been recorded in the county and taken into account with our title, but we just aren't sure how it is relevant unless we're able to see it in its entirety and apply it to our ownership. When our brokers tried to surmise what the title would be based off the limited documentation we were given of the JOA, it does change the ownership in section 32. And I believe there's an exhibit that I referenced in my original testimony that credits Cimarex with acreage if the JOA was applied accordingly to the exhibit A that we were provided.
Right. And if, is it correct, is my recollection correct that even if this JOA were applicable under the ownership changes that you've put forth, that Avant would still have roughly double the working interest in this Daytona unit as Cimarex?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. And you didn't find any record title evidence of this in the 2022 to 2024 to October 1st, 2024 title runs. Is that correct?
That is correct. We found no evidence of the JOA recording, which isn't standard practice to record an entire JOA. However, it is standard practice to record a memo of a JOA to put other parties on notice that there is a JOA covering those lands. And we were not able to find a recorded memo in Lee County.
Sure. And then once you were alerted to this JOA or the presence of this JOA, did you ask your brokers to go out and take a second look?
Yes, they took a second and I believe a third look, as well as myself and several other landmen in our office.
Okay. And they didn't find anything?
There was no evidence of a memo or the JOA recorded in Lee County.
Okay, thank you. If we could go real quick to Avant's rebuttal exhibit number 1. Yeah, that's correct. Okay, Ms. Guerra, what is the purpose of this slide?
This slide is a rebuttal to Cimarex's claim of Avant's interest in section 32. The Cimarex slide, I believe it's exhibit A7 in their original testimony, claims that Avant only owns 1.2 net mineral acres in section 32. We have acquired several parties in section 32 over the last year, and our interest is quite higher in section 32 according to our title, which has again been run by brokers and title attorneys. So the purpose of this slide, exhibit A16, I believe is what we're calling it today, is just showing that Avant has 71 acres committed or owned in section 32 as to the Bone Spring formation, and 122 net acres or owned or committed in the Wolf Camp. So this is just showing that it's quite a bit higher than the 1.2 net acres that Cimarex has credited us with.
Okay. So we heard a lot of testimony about supposed mistakes in Avant's title. Just to make sure I'm clear for the record, there were a number of instruments in the record chain of title into Avant that Cimarex did not represent in its ownership.
Correct.
Would you consider that a mistake?
I would, based on the title that we have seen and that our brokers and title attorneys have presented to us and that we have personally reviewed, we believe that Cimarex has not credited us with interest in section 32 that they should have.
Okay, thank you. So if we can move my last question, what's going to be Avant rebuttal exhibit 2, but we've marked A17 here. Can you just walk us through this slide briefly?
Yes, so I believe last Thursday or Friday, I can't remember which day, Marathon Oil Permian filed an entry of appearance into our cases. I believe that Marathon is being represented by Ms. Bradfield. And the basis of their entry of appearance was due to a discrepancy in Avant's exhibits, specifically Exhibit A6A, that demonstrates our summary of interests. Marathon believes they own more in our proposed Daytona unit, both in section 29 and 32. Upon receiving this email, we have had our brokers work diligently to try and get to the root of this discrepancy, and they are actively looking through records, seeing if there's possibly a misinterpretation, and we've been also communicating directly with the landmen at Marathon Oil Permian to ensure that our records are correct. Due to the nature of only having about 5 days to review this title as to this supposed discrepancy, we're not in a position today to update our exhibits until we get to the bottom of what the possible discrepancy is.
Okay, so you're not stipulating that there is an actual discrepancy. Your testimony is that this is in response to Marathon's allegation that there's a discrepancy.
Yes, and also this is just to ensure that Avant is looking into this issue, and we will certainly supplement our exhibits if a discrepancy is found.
Thank you. And last question. So Marathon did not enter an objection in this case. Is that correct?
Correct. It's my understanding they just entered an appearance, not an objection.
Okay, thank you. That concludes my questions.
Thank you. Do you have any cross-examination?
I do. Good afternoon, Ms. Guerra. How are you?
Hi. I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. I want to start with the rebuttal exhibit we're showing on the screen. It is marked on the top of the page as Exhibit A16. Mr. Holliday, what rebuttal exhibit number is this? Is it rebuttal exhibit 1?
My understanding in the naming convention, it will be Avant exhibit, rebuttal exhibit 1.
Okay, thank you. So I'm looking at Avant rebuttal exhibit 1. Can you see the exhibit?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so I just want to confirm that I heard your testimony correctly. These charts here show what Avant believes its working interest is within Section 32. Is that correct?
That is correct. There's a chart for the Bone Spring unit, which actually, as I'm looking now, that top chart should say Bone Spring. However, the chart below does indicate that is just Wolfcamp.
Okay, Wolfcamp. So Avant is now testifying that it owns 5.61% of the working interest within the entire Bone Spring formation in Section 32. Is that correct?
So the Bone Spring unit that Avant is pooling is represented in that chart. So again, as we've heard over the last 2 days, Avant is seeking to pool the first and third Bone Spring.
Okay. And does Avant have different ownership within the second Bone Spring?
They do, yes.
Okay. And do you know what that ownership percentage is?
Objection,
not
it's
off-
not relevant. There's an objection.
What is the objection?
That the ownership in the second Bone Spring is not relevant. It was not in Ms. Guerra's testimony direct. It wasn't in rebuttal.
Okay.
Okay.
Miss.
So there is no evidence right now as to what Avant's ownership is in the
Wait, Miss
second Bone
Bradford,
Spring?
I'm sorry, I
No.
was looking for a
Yeah.
response.
Oh,
to
I'm
the
so
objection.
sorry. I'm so sorry. So the response to the objection is it is a relevant issue in Magnum Hunters cases. It's been an issue that we've been discussing throughout most of the day today.
But how does it relate to this specific exhibit?
This specific exhibit, I'm just trying to figure out what is represented in the first chart and confirm that there's a correct understanding in the
Okay,
record.
so I'm going to sustain the objection. Why don't you ask a different question?
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Ms. Guerra, this exhibit shows in total that Avant is claiming that it owns 9.56% of the working interest in the Wolf Camp formation in section 32, correct?
Correct.
Okay, great. I'm going to go down to the next exhibit. And I also represent Marathon Oil Permian LLC in this case. Are you aware of that representation?
Yes, I believe I mentioned that previously.
Did Marathon's land team reach out to you about a potential question about their ownership interest shown in Avant's exhibits in case 24632 and 24633?
They did not. I actually went back through my emails to see that, to see if we had previously discussed their ownership when they received proposals. And I did not see any evidence that they reached out to us. I, however, upon understanding of their entry of appearance, I reached out to their land team.
Okay. And you reached out to them. Did Marathon then send you some information regarding their title in section 32?
They did. They did send me information, and as upon receiving that information from their land team, we had our brokers look specifically at the information they provided as to their ownership in the Daytona unit.
Okay. And was that information a list of
Excuse me?
Mata E, do you have any backup batteries there?
Let's see. I can use this one.
Perfect.
Sorry, Ms. Guerra, my microphone died all of a sudden. Did Marathon ask you to look at a list of assignments that were in the county records that they believed were in their chain of title?
They did as to section 32.
Okay. And what did Avant originally show Marathon's net mineral interest ownership to be within its proposed spacing unit?
Gosh, I'd have to either pull up an email or look at the summary of interest. I don't have that noted in my exhibit. I apologize.
Okay. After looking at the documents that Marathon sent you regarding their chain of title, have you found validity that some of those documents do show that they own more interest within one of the sections?
So as I stated, it is a little too early to state that one way or another. We've obviously been in this hearing for the last 2 days. And so that gives about 2 working days that we've had an opportunity for our brokers and title attorney to examine those documents and ensure that their interest would be different than what we purported in our exhibits.
Okay. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and just, I need to pull up something to use on my laptop really quickly. Are you aware of why Marathon specifically entered their interest in this case or entered their appearance in this case? Did Marathon tell you, specifically what their discrepancy or their dispute was?
Other than their ownership, I don't believe they stated anything different.
Ms. Bradford, can I interrupt for a moment?
Yeah.
I'm lost as to where these questions are going. This is all about ownership, interest. It is all about ownership. Is there, I understand that there's a dispute over ownership interests. I understand that's what the rebuttal exhibits are about. But why don't the rebuttal exhibits just stand for themselves? Why do we need to have endless cross-examination about people's opinions about the documents?
That's okay. Yeah,
Okay.
we can stand on the
Good.
rebuttal exhibits. That's
Excellent.
fine.
Okay, so please proceed.
Then that concludes my question.
Very good, thank you. Okay, Mr. Holliday, are there any other witnesses?
I do have one briefly.
And what is this about?
It's about the Cimarex rebuttal exhibit number 1.
What do you want your witness to deal? How do you want you? What's the issue with Cimarex rebuttal number 1?
Sure. Avant's reservoir expert is concerned about the data used in that slide and the veracity of it.
The data used. Can you be a little bit more specific?
Yeah. I'll do my best.
In other words, what's the concern? And what do
The
you?
concern is that the map or maps represented there left out certain wells that would have been detrimental to their position.
I see. So you feel as though, so your expert feels as though the map that that is a rebuttal exhibit 1 from Avant,
Right.
from Cimarex, leaves out wells
Right.
and gives a false picture because of it.
Correct.
Okay, keep it real short.
Real short. I'll just ask that one question.
Go ahead.
Okay. I'd like to call Mr. Shane Kelly, please.
Mr. Kelly, you're still under oath.
Good afternoon, Mr. Kelly. Mindful that we all have to get to the airport. Can you please discuss your concerns with Cimarex rebuttal exhibit number 1? And it might be helpful if we put it back on the screen.
Is someone putting it on the screen?
we're good.
I believe it was slide 3
So that'd be
or page 3.
Page 3.
Yeah, this is the one. I think we heard testimony earlier, that there was some concern about bringing in wells a little bit too far south, but I wanted to bring up my own concern. I mean, there's clearly a pay map here on the left side that's showing like for like rock, and there's a lot of north-south wells that are drilled in the same time period with the same frac that were conveniently left out of the data set because they are much better wells than what he's showing here. He picked 3 of the worst wells in the entire data set to throw on here from the north-south direction, which I think falsifies the view to the commission of what's actually going on. He states that these were all drilled by the same operator, so it's a like-for-like comparison, but none of these wells are drilled by Franklin Mountain. Franklin Mountain just acquired this acreage within the last few years. They are not the people responsible for the production on these wells. They're actually drilled by multiple different operators in his data set. My data set tried to bring in, it had about 40 north-southwest wells, and it brought in pretty much every east-west well that's ever been drilled up here. So I tried to create a more complete data set. My data set does go down to the south, but as you can see on his pay map, most of my wells stayed on the east side of his pay, which is green in this map, which is actually worse pay than the east-west wells that he picked. So I think this is just falsifying information for the commission. I didn't want to leave that to sit there so that you had the full picture.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Ms. Bradford?
I have no questions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, this one
Mr.
is
Hearing
Biggs.
Examiner,
Yes, Mr. McClure, thank you.
I don't have any questions for Mr. Kelly, but it might be worthwhile for me to ask a few questions of Ms. Guerra.
Oh, please. Okay, so this witness may be excused. Thank you, sir, for your participation.
Thank you.
Go right ahead, Mr. McClure.
Yeah, Ms. Guerra, are you there able to hear me now?
Yes, I am.
Yes, Ms. Guerra, a few quick questions for you. This assessment that you plan on conducting in regards to interest percentages that you were referencing, did I hear that correctly?
Yes, a title review of Marathon's interest.
And will that review include the entirety of whatever concern or the concerns that Cimarex may have had with the interest that you had listed?
I don't believe it would be the entirety. It seems Cimarex has issue with, all of Avant's title within section 32, whereas Marathon's concerns are limited to certain tracks within section 32.
Okay, so it's specifically Marathon's interest that you plan on conducting additional review about, is that correct?
Correct, since Marathon, approached us late last week, pointing out a couple inconsistencies we are going to look into further to see if we need to revise our exhibits.
Upon hearing testimony from Cimarex, do you feel comfortable with the interests that, the rest of the interests that Avant is portraying in its exhibits?
We do, yes. We've done extensive title for several years, and believe that our title is true, and correct.
Okay, based off your understanding, was Cimarex, was there any difference in persons rather than solely interest? That was a part of Cimarex's concerns there.
Between Avant's title and Cimarex's title, is that what you're
Sure.
referring?
Yes, I apologize. That is correct. Was all the same persons identified, and it solely went down to how much interest each person had. Is that correct?
Yes, to an extent. I do believe that Avant has several owners, that we are showing in title in section 32 in the Bone Spring formations, that Cimarex is not crediting interest to in section 32. Those are the people that Cimarex is stating are strangers in title, so we show them in our summary of interests, but Cimarex does not.
Okay, so in your current list of persons, it includes all the persons that Cimarex is including and an additional on top of that. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
So is it your position that Cimarex is missing persons?
Our interpretation of title, how it stands today, yes, we do think that they are missing people.
As far as this assessment in regards to Marathon's interest, what sort of timetable is that going to take you to complete?
As to Marathon's interest, we think we could probably wrap it up by next week. So I would suggest if we needed to supplement our exhibits, perhaps we could do so at that time.
It may be something with bringing into your closing arguments, perhaps one way or the other, whether you agree or not.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure that'll be, I mean, 2 weeks for transcripts. So I'm sure it's much, or at least 2 weeks beyond that, but that'll be up to the hearing examiner's discretion. Thank you, Ms. Guerra. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. McClure.
Thank-
Does that
thank you, Mr.
conclude
Chairman.
your rebuttal case, Mr. Holladay?
It does, yes, sir.
Okay, then we are done with the evidentiary hearing, and now let's discuss post-hearing timetable. As you all know, it takes 2 weeks to get a verbatim transcript. Yesterday's was transcribed, so we will have it, but today's, and Mata, you don't know the extra delay when it's recorded, do you? Okay, is Freya with us?
I believe she is
Okay.
online.
Freya, do you know how long it takes if we record a hearing and send it? Does it add time to the 2 week period? Well, let's just assume that we have our transcripts 2 weeks from, let's say, Monday. And Monday would be the 11th. So we're saying right about the week of Thanksgiving, we will have our transcripts in. How long do the parties want to draft closing arguments and proposed findings and conclusions? I'll start with you, Mr. Holliday.
The issues are extensive
Yes.
and you got 3 parties. I'll defer to my colleagues. I'm not really sure. I mean, I would,
Some opinion.
okay. So one opinion would be 4 weeks.
A month, okay? And you, Ms. Bradfield?
A month would be reasonable, given the week of Thanksgiving
Okay,
is in that time period.
okay,
Yeah.
all right. So 1 month. Okay, and Mr. Feldwood, I know you don't even want to draft these, but since I'm asking you to, how long would it take?
So we're talking a month from November 11th,
We are talking about a month from November 25th.
November 25th. Oh, good. Okay, because I was thinking that's going to be tough. So we can make it do Christmas Day.
Yes. No, the day before, Christmas Eve.
So that would be Monday, December 23rd is what you're thinking?
That's fine, yes.
Does that work?
That works for us, yes.
Okay.
Okay. Freya, are you with us? No, I guess you're not. Okay. Marie, do we send out a notice when transcript comes in? Is that what we do? Or do we just upload it to the case file?
Mr. Hearing Examiner, I'm not sure, to be
Okay.
honest.
All
If
right.
you want us to send a notice, I'm happy to do so when we.
That's fine.
Get the
I think that's what we do. I think we upload it. So the parties can just start looking at the case file. We also need to talk about amended exhibit packets. When do Mr. Holliday, what is the deadline? Would November 25th work for you? I think that makes sense. That works for you? That gives everyone plenty of time. Okay, so we have exhibit packets due November 25th. That's when the transcript will come in. The hearing clerk will clean up the record and remove the old exhibit packets. And then I'll take a look at those exhibit packets to make sure that they're in order as well. Please put a cover letter. Is there anything further from anyone before we go off the record?
Mr. Hearing Examiner, we got
Yes,
the
Mr.
list.
McClure.
We have
You
the list
some-
of requests.
Yes, your list of wants. What are they, sir?
I guess the fastest and easiest one would be for Matador. Mr. Feldewart, I assume you're still there.
Yes, sir.
I think the only thing I was looking at for Matador was a table and a map of the wells for Matador's Exhibit C6.
Got it.
And in addition to that, if I could also be provided by an email that list in an Excel format.
You're talking about the list, right?
Yeah, it's not the map, just the
Yeah.
list of them, so I can grab all the API numbers.
Yep. Certainly.
I thank you, sir. Cimerex may be the next easiest. Are you with me, Miss Bradford?
Yes, I am.
Okay, on your compulsory pooling application checklist, we have
Yes.
2 different wolf camp pools. Within section 33, the pool is Airstrip Wolf Camp. That's pool code 970.
9/7, I'm sorry, can you?
97, and then I keep mispronouncing it, but Zill as in
Oh,
Neil.
thank you. Perfect. I got it.
And then in section 32, which might have been the one you included, was EK Wolf Camp. And that pool code was 2167 Zill.
Thank you.
In addition to that, you have a notice spreadsheet. However, it does not include the certified tracking numbers. Instead, it seems that you scanned all the different green cards. If we could
Yes.
resubmit that tracking spreadsheet and include the certified numbers within the spreadsheet, that would definitely be ideal.
Okay.
And then in addition to that, just a list of the wells used in the study in, I believe it's Cimarex's rebuttal exhibit.
Great.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Mr. Holliday for Vaughn is a little bit bigger of a list here. Are you with me, sir?
I am.
Yeah, I don't know if you would call that the specific testimony, but essentially we're looking at more specifics for the allocation method. If we could submit a more specifics about that actual calculation and what the numbers are actually being that Avon is proposing.
Okay.
Additionally, your Avant's certify or track or notice spreadsheet additionally does not include the certified tracking numbers. If we could add that on your guys' as well and resubmit that.
Okay.
And then in addition, the affidavit of publication appears that the newspaper clipping was either overlapped or folded or something. If we could submit a new copy of the actual full one of that.
Would you like a new copy from the place where it was published?
Well, since it's the attorney prior to yourself, I mean, unless you have it somewhere, essentially, we just need to see the full newspaper clipping. The current newspaper clipping is partial.
Okay, I can get that.
Once that marathon assessment or marathon's interest assessment is completed, if we can either provide a supplemental or else including your closing argument, however you want to provide that, it doesn't matter to me.
Yes, sir.
And then the last thing is a list of the wells used in Avant's study. If I recall, there was only one study for Avant, correct?
I don't want to get me lying on the record. I'm not sure.
I believe there was just the one. I know it was the 2012 to 2015.
Sure.
And there was like 20 wells, something along those lines.
Sure.
That was immediately to the east and the southeast of the area of interest.
Okay.
And essentially what I'm looking for is a list of the wells. And then within that spreadsheet, could we also include any information that Avant has on the proppant that was used per foot and the fluid used per foot in those completions?
Yes, sir.
And additionally, please via an email, provide me with an Excel version of that list.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Holliday. That was, thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner. That was all I
Thank you.
had on my list.
Thank you, Mr. McClure. So besides the Excel spreadsheets, which of course, if a party sends something to Mr. McClure, please copy the other attorneys here. Then we expect these asks to be part of the amended exhibit packets. I have notes here to that. We have dates, we have deadlines. Is there anything further from any of the parties before we go off the record?
No, sir. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for hanging in there. I know everyone wants to go because the snow is building up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.